Sort of Coming Chapter 898. Before I saw the hermit, I was still curious about what a brilliant man he must be to be worthy of the Ning Jianxian, who is the number one person in the world. Even in the presence of my brother Zhong, I just confessed it. I have had this doubt more than once, twice, until I saw it today. I didn't know what a perfect match was made in heaven. I have seen Ning Jianxian, and I know that all women in the world are vulgar fans. When I saw the hidden officials with my own eyes, I knew what it means to be young and promising. I wasted my time a lot of years, and I really lived to be a dog. I've gone. By the way, Lord Chen, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Su Gu, the lonely girl named Gusu, but I am the aunt of the 3 ants and 6 poems. I belong to the same temperament with the Zhong brothers. To be honest, the reason why I was able to marry Jinlan with Zhong Qi, traveling with Tongyi's Hao, said 1,000 things and 10,000 thanks to Ning Jianxian's matchmaking. Zhong Kue looked at the fat man with sincere expression and sincere speech, which was pitiful. It's not all lies. Gusu has questioned Qin Pingon many times. For example, this servant must be a big pig's trotter with intestines, and his stomach is not good and he can't eat any whole grains. He read a few books about sages and sages. Bad learning, a bit of an injustice, gentleman, good at rhetoric, and I want to come to Ningyao. The qualifications are too good. I definitely don't know the dangers of the Red World. She grew up in the Great Wall of Jianqi. A scholar from a foreign country, pry the corners of the entire Great Wall of Sword Qi, Qin Pingon was fascinated by his rhetoric. How has such things been missing in the novels of Smoke Powder and Zhou Xian? However, the reason why the fat man is so honest at the moment and his words are so diligent and flattering is naturally afraid of Ningyao, who is temporarily missing. The world's ghosts, in addition to fearing the thunder method, fearing the dragon and tiger mountain celestial masters of the yellow and purple nobles, are more afraid of the great monks with luck, because they will be overcome by nature. Cui Dongshan shook his sleeves, which is very desolate. My family style is really a weird thing. Counting with your fingers, it seems that only the 14 realms like Lao Guanzhou and Jingzhuzhong can be avoided. This ghost from a human emperor was once one of Zhoumi's followers in the Haoran world. It has been laid out for a long time, but when Zhoumiz ascended to the sky and left, it was like taking away his luck and was quickly ascended by the sword. Ning Yao, who is in the vast world, found traces, and was intercepted and hunted by the Confucian temple at sea. But the lean camel is bigger than a horse. Since it is a fairyland that has fallen from the ascension realm, it cannot be regarded as an ordinary fairy, just like Jiang Shangzhen. Now there are few fairies in the world dare to say that they are his opponents, such as the great sword of Gao Zheqing Gao. Xian Su Hao on the side of Kishandu and Yuguazong Wangji day and night, mentioning the old suzerain Jiang Shangzhen. Su Hao could only say that he dared to ask the sword with him, but never thought that he could beat Jiang Shangzhen. Under normal circumstances, this ghost in Tongyi's Hao, which is seriously lacking in top combat power, is considered a rare opponent in real combat. That mausoleum in the sea, the tomb is suspended in the sky so it can be hidden for many years. If it is said that a night ship that is erratic is a mosquito and flies in a mansion, it strays everywhere and occasionally makes a little noise. Then this fatty's place of cultivation is the gecko lying motionless in the corner, so it is harder to be spotted by the Confucian temple. Probably because of reaching out and not hitting the smiley person. Looking at the smiling young hidden official, the fat man took a reassurance pill. He just shook his arms around the vultures of public practice and passed the level easily. What? He is young and likes this set of shameless people who wants face and doesn't boast. The fat man asked tentatively, Qinshand, where is immortal Ning Jian? I am in love with reason, so I have to thank her face to face. After all, I resisted, and instead of learning from Zhong Kue, I directly called Ning Yao his younger sister-in-law. Qin Pingon smiled and said, she has returned to the colorful world. The fat man was full of regret, rubbing his hands gently, and his momentum changed a bit. Although he lowered his head, his waist straightened a bit. That's right, next to Qin Pingon there is no ascendant swordsman right now. Don't look at the fat man's slick tone and boring speech, he is just like an unlearned market helper, but there is something that he really spotted. If Qin Pingon was born out of the sky like Sword Immortal Su Jun in Jin Zhezhou, the fat man would not follow Zhong Kue to Xindu Mountain, he would only dare to stay far away, waiting for Zhong Kue to finish his next celebration. Continue to travel with companions. But since Qin Pingon was still in the Jade Realm a few years ago, no matter what Qin Ping's feat frightened others in the wild world, the fat man can be sure of something. Qin Pingon is definitely not a 14th level monk. As for how he can interrupting a highest city in the world dragging and competing with Fei Fei for a dragging down river, and even able to open Tuition with swords, and behead an ascendant peak sword repair great demon. It doesn't matter, the fat man still kills a truth. Go the shortcut of Qin Pingon is like a greedy the great thief who has his own merits, waits for the young hidden official to return to Hauran, let alone the 14th realm. It is estimated that even if it can keep the golden core realm, even if Hongfu is in full bloom. This idea of the fat man was the result of the final deduction based solely on Zhong Kuei's chatting with him. In Zhong Kuei's view there is actually no problem, even the truth. The fat man suddenly noticed the young monk in the yellow hat and blue shirt, and began to smile slightly, not smiling. The widow has cultivated the Tao for 3,000 years and he is invincible. If it weren't for that Madame Tundun who was so stubborn that she couldn't even get out of her mouth when she turned off the light, otherwise a shui pit would have changed its owner long ago. Qin Pingon turned his head and smiled. Xiaomo, treat your distinguished guests well. Xiaomo nodded and said, don't worry, son. Only two kinds of guests are distinguished guests. One is personally greeted by his own son, and the other is able to eat melon seeds. Zhong Kuei glanced at the fat man doing it himself. Just now when he came on the road, Gusu said he had to say that he wanted to try the deep and shallow water on this cloud-covered Xindu mountain. As long as the other monk is singled out, don't worry about it. As a senior on the mountain, I have to teach them one mountain and one mountain high reason, lest young people set up the next sect. They will raise their tails eyes higher than the top and look down on the heroes of the world, and they will suffer a lot. But if the other party doesn't talk about justice, fights and likes to hug them, then you Zhong Kuei has to persuade me to fight, lest I get up in the fight and the shots are not serious, causing the young people around Qin Pingon to hang up and go back to participate in the celebration with injuries. It's not pretty. Qin Pingon pulled Zhong Kuei alone for a walk. Everything is difficult at the beginning. The preparation of a new sect often involves many secret formations in the early stage. It is not easy to hire mountain craftsmen and organ teachers. It can only be done by the veterans. At this moment they are busy in the ferry and the mountain. There are as many as 200 Fulu leisure and government puppets, and their ranks are not high. They are much lower than those rain workers, mountain pickers and fish catchers on the ferry, but they are more than enough to work as coolies. The supervisors responsible for driving the puppets and driving the powerful men are exactly three. The exiled monk from Yezigang Tower was not very old, more than 100 years old, and his realm was 2 views of the sea in 1 cave, and the 3 of them were still secret guests of Xindu Mountain. As soon as Zhong Kuei stretched out his hand, Qin Pingon already handed over a jug of wine. Zhong Kuei lifted the red paper mud seal, lowered his head and sniffed, said a good drink and asked with a smile, did you fall on the side of Tuiyue Mountain? Qin Pingon nodded. Fortunately the martial arts realm has not fallen much, but he has fallen back from the Guasian level, otherwise he would not dare to go out. Zhong Kuei turned his head and raised his chin towards Xiaomo. There is such a guardian next to me. What are you afraid of? Change to me. When you go out you have to walk sideways like a dart and shout all the way. Mountain. Qin Pingon was puzzled. You can see Xiaomo's realm cultivation level? Mr. Xiaomo is ingenious. Zhong Kuei smiled and shook his head and said in his heart, I can only see some long-standing causal entanglements and roughly piece together the truth, such as a long Dao from the wild world or a sword repairer. Because he died under the sword of Mr. Xiaomo, many of these immortals are still unresolved, and they are naturally ascended predecessors with a story. Ordinary people and monks on the mountain have completely different visions of the world. Then there are changes between Wangqi and ordinary monks. The 2 of them sat on a piece of Xianxia timber as thick as the mouth of a well. Qin Pingon took out a wooden box from his sleeve and handed it to Zhong Kuei. I wanted to give it to you a long time ago. We have never had a chance since we started it for many years. Meet. In the early years I bought a piece of goods at the Qingfufeng at Delongshen Ferry. A set of 4 celestial masters cut ghost money. Zhong Kuei took over and opened the wooden box directly. Yeah, good stuff. Did you spend a lot of money? Qin Pingon didn't pretend and quoted the price. It's not a small amount, but 5 grains of rain. Zhong Kuei sighed. How many pots of 5-year brewed plum wine can be bought? And a few roasted whole lambs. Even I, who is used to being the accountant, can't be counted. Qin Pingon said for no reason. Being the accountant, I still learned from you. Zhong Kuei smiled and said, it doesn't feel good. Zhong Kuei had been to Shujin Lake. But Qin Pingon was so exhausted that he lay on the ground and fell asleep. Zhong Kui didn't bother at the time. Qin Pingon laughed off. Zhong Kui took a sip of wine. He only said that there were 3 Confucian academies in Tonggishao in the past. In fact, Zhong Kui had many friends. Teacher, classmate, good friend, old man is like a tree in the garden, and the autumn breeze is sparse day by day. Qin Pingon said, I heard that Junyang went to Long Hushan Heavenly Master's mansion and returned home this time. Have you seen it? Zhong Kui rolled his eyes and said, which pot does not open or lift which pot? There was a moment of silence. Zhong Kui couldn't help sighing and put his palm against his chin. I didn't think about what I could say after I went there. Besides, there may be a closed door, let's talk about it later. In fact, the biggest knot is the Tianhu Junyang who is cultivating Taoism in Longhu Mountain. According to Zhong Kui, it is not the lady proprietor who opened the inn back then. Back then, together with the heroic spirits of Skeleton Beach, Jingwenqing, were ordered to go to the Western Buddhist countries. Zhong Kui once asked a respected Buddhist dragon elephant. He asked 2 questions and reincarnated as a human being. Am I still me? Even if you can resuscitate, recover memories, remembering the past lives of Lu predecessor, who is the older and the younger? Qin Pingon roughly guessed the entanglement in Zhong Kui's heart and didn't say anything. There was some embarrassment. It was not all the authorities were obsessed with bystanders, and the authorities might have thought too thoroughly. Zhong Kui began to change the subject. In your light, I saw Wui in Xinjiang City. He and Master Qianggu kept hiding their heads and tails on the Yiming Road, because the 2 ascending realm ghosts were there. Be extremely cautious. It's almost equivalent to the mountain and wild repairs on our side. They are all ascending. They still have no branches and leaves. They don't gather the Yin soldiers without killing them. They are doing the business of the feudal town and they have unique means to hide. Breath just slowly eating away the aura of clear spirit, so the underworld is quite because of the headache. There is no such thing as a thorn in the flesh, but just letting it go. After all, it is not plausible and there is a suspicion of negligence. So when I saw Wui at the time, I moved with affection, understood reason and took a mouthful of a senior. I finally convinced him and helped him find an official position before leaving. I heard not long ago that Senior Wu Tai soon, pulling out the radish to bring out the mud is a little rewarding. If not unexpected, Senior Wu Tai is busy looking for the master right now. Qin Pingon asked in his heart. The founder of Xinjiang City who is now in Lingxiang? Zhong Kui shook his head and said, after seeing Wuxia I have checked 2 files and there is no clue. There is another one that I cannot go to temporarily. I will look for opportunities in the future to see if I can go there and look through the list. Qin Pingon asked about the Green Book. The name of the Green Book is almost equivalent to the so-called rank of the immortal class in the Jiguai novels. For example, Lao Guanzhu used to travel to small towns with Taoist ancestors before, and took the initiative to visit Luapa Mountain. The rare Taoist painting presented by Lao Guanzhu was not taught by those who have immortal names and green books in ancient times. In fact, the clear and distinct route means that the water of the well does not violate the river water in the true sense. Just like Qin Pingon traveled through the mountains and rivers of the 3 continents, the pure martial artist and the trainer, the genealogy teacher and the Yamazawa Yeshio, the relationship between each other is intricate and there are constant disputes, but there are few direct conflicts between the trainers and the gods of mountains and rivers, especially the Qinghuang Temple. Of case. Regarding the archives of the Hades, there are few records in the Summer Palace, with only some scattered fragments. On the side of the Fire Temple in Dali capital, Feng Anti holds the Biwafudi distilled beverages with 10,000 years of soil as the mud. Used to be every 100 years. Will pay tribute to the 3 Yin Ming forces, but at that time Aunt Feng seemed to have deliberately omitted a certain force, and only mentioned with Qin Ping in about the 6th palace of the ghost mansion of Fengdu, as well as Feng's Hushan Qingjun, who is in charge of the heaven and the blessed land of the earth and all the immortals. According to Aunt Feng's statement, Qing Fangzhou Mountain, which was ruled by the monarch, was the mansion of the commander who took charge of the death record. And the name of the upper life. The rules are strict, the ceremonies are cumbersome and they are step by step just like the officialdom of Yang. Then Qin Pingon said something about the immortal way, hoping that Zhong Kui would help as much as possible to check the person's past life roots and feet without breaking the rules and prohibitions. Zhong Kui nodded and agreed, remembering the fake Taoist monk from Aquarius. His name was Nian Jing, the word Xianwei the name of Xushuan Taoist and the birthplace and birth date. Qin Pingon smiled and said, There are people in the DB, it is convenient. Zhong Kui said solemnly, it's your skill to make friends like me, you can be complacent. Qin Pingan drank a sip of wine and wiped the corners of his mouth with the back of his hand. Learned. Qin Pingan glanced at the fat man and asked in his heart, how can this Eugene follow you? Zhong Kui shook the hip flask. It is the meaning of the saint of rituals, how can I refuse? But after a long time, in fact it still makes do, of course. The premise is that you will temporarily take over. Otherwise I have been beaten to death by this fat man with ill-tempered temperament. It's been 100 times. This fat man who now claims to be Su Gu and Taoist Gusu, his real name is Eugene. He was known as the Emperor of the Ages when he was alive, and he was infamous after his death. In any case, an emperor almost made the feat of one country is one continent earlier than the Dali Song clan. It is probably not too much to criticize and brutalize in the history books of later generations. It's not very reasonable just to scold him for being faint. Zhong Kui lifted the hip flask and touched Qin Pingan lightly. Yeah, you are well informed. Do you all know the fat man's real name? Qin Pingan smiled and said, I'm not afraid that Eugene will seek revenge with me. I know myself and the enemy and be prepared for it. In fact, leaving aside some secret history of the palace, Qin Pingan may now know Eugene better than Eugene. National titles and various reigns, important edicts issued, policies for governing the country, resumes, posthumous titles of the ministers of civil and military affairs in the court, and Qin Pingan did not miss a single word in the archives of the Confucian Temple's merits. A copy, in addition to Qin Yujing Xianxia being asked in detail about some gossip that should not be recorded in the Confucian Temple. Therefore, in Qin Pingan's Xinhu library, there has long been an extra-secret file dedicated to the ghost Eugene, and he regards Eugene as the pinnacle of the Ascension realm. 5 thunders rectify the law, Long Hushan Thunder Board. Just to mention that the Book of Alchemy contains several types of talismans specially used to discourage ghosts. For this reason, Qin Pingan meticulously refined 700 or 800 Huangshi talisman. In order to one day be fortunate to meet, there will be opportunity to entertain distinguished guests. There are only a handful of monks who have similar treatments, such as Sui Chu Gong Wu Shuang Jiang, and Pei Min, one of the 3 masters in swordsmanship. It's not an exaggeration to put it at all. If Qin Pingan has never fallen into a realm, he is still the sword repairer of the Yupu realm and the real martial artist of the realm. He is alone, without the help of external forces, and he can completely wrestle with a ghost in the fairyland. Anyway, the fairy is not I haven't played. Yun Yao of the 9 Realms Immortal Hall, and Han Yushu of Wan Yaozong have all experienced them. If Eugene is not with Zhong Kui, but a narrow encounter, even if there is no Xiao Mo around him as a follower, Qin Pingan will not be a ghost who has fallen into a fairyland. Zhong Kui tweeted, this is too much to say. With Ning Yao as a Taoist companion who would dare to provoke Qin Pingan easily. There may be some secret calculations, but it is impossible to explain the provocation on the face. Now the 2 nominal co-lords of the world, Ning Yao in the colorful world, are magnificent in the barren world. And both of them are ascendant realm sword repairs with great avenues of expectation. Under the 14th realm, who can't weigh his own weight? It might be okay to say now that Ning Yao has not yet entered the 14th realm. The number 1 person in the colorful world is still relatively not so scary. Moreover, the current has not really changed, and there are now several 14th realm great monks in the world. Do things, both don't dare to be too capricious. When the sky changes, it's like the shackles are gone. All 14th level cultivators' character or heart will have many subtle changes, and when they do things they won't be so conservative. As for Ning Yao's temper, the mountain monks in Howren's world already knew roughly. If she had a good temper, she wouldn't be able to fly into the world with the sword, but she didn't say hello to the Confucian temple. As soon as Zhong Kui left, Eugene suddenly felt a little pressure. After all, there are many people on the other side, and he is a dragon who crosses the river, and the strong dragon does not suppress the snake. There is really a conflict. Zhong Kui must turn his elbow out. The kid Qin Pingan seems to have been injured hurting Dadao's roots, so he has to hide here to retreat. It seems that he has a good relationship with Zhong Kui and is willing to leave the customs temporarily, so he was a sword intent before show it out. That's the way a sign that the heart is fluctuating, and the realm is not yet firm. That's why I just moved 1 step horizontally, showing weakness. The fat man looked at the little girl, began to put on the elders and said with a smile, I heard that you knew Zhong Kui when you were very young? Pei Qian nodded. The world of this ghost is more complicated. There are horrors of corpses spreading across the wild and starving for thousands of miles. There are also scenes of prosperity, singing and dancing and fertile soil. There is also a thin man wearing a very loose dragon robe sitting on a dragon chair. Self-drinking judging, staring blankly at the opening doors from north to south. The vision spread all the way. Eugene sighed and nodded and said, "Blink of an eye, she is the big girl." Pei Qian twitched at the corner of his mouth. How did Eugene know Pei Qian's talent? For the time being, the fat man only knew Qin Pingan's disciple. The little girl whose name was Zhou Xian was a martial artist of 9 realms and she was well known on the Howran mountain. But I don't know that the 3 people who are right below are actually an ending martial artist, an immortal, and an ascendant peak swordsman. I don't even know that the boy in white is equal to half an embroidered tiger in Aquarius. I don't know that the young man in the yellow hat and green shirt used to make wine with the old masters. 10,000 years ago he most liked asking the sword with the strong. In fact, after Eugene left the undersea tomb, the person who most wanted to see was the embroidered tiger Cui Yang, who was a master of the country, and he was sincerely regarded as half a fellow man. Fortunately, Jiangshan is the greatest beauty. The iron cavalry shook the ground like thunder, and it was a kind of luck to walk all over the mountains and rivers. Zhong Kui said suddenly, "Stretch out your hand." Qin Pingan passed a hand over. Zhong Kui is like a doctor taking the pulse. In an instant there was a vision from the sky and the earth, and the sky over the entire Xindu mountain boundary was densely covered with dark clouds and the sea of clouds was rolling, extremely heavy, covering the sun, and in a flash the day was like night. Xiao Imo hesitated for a moment and did not go there. Since that Zhong Kui is a friend of his own son, he can be trusted. Pei Qian is worried. Cui Dongshan shook his snow-white sleeves suddenly, offering a golden flying sword like a wheat ear, castrated like a rainbow. The sword light circulated sharply in the air, and quickly drew a huge golden circle, instantly reminiscent of the vision. Band not right, the secret is leaked outside. Eugene's eyelids trembled. This young man named Cui Dongshan was actually a hidden fairy, or a sword repairer. So Eugene cautiously said, "If you have some misunderstandings, why don't you just let the wind dissipate? Misery is also bitter. Is there a poor ghost in the world who has a more ill-fated life than yourself? Everything is difficult and people are always down. Wuxia is a ghost and immortal as well as Xianpin City." You would like to hear what Zhong Kui said. The last time Wuxia appeared in the barren world he still teamed up with Master Qianggu, and one of the barbaric old thrones, the old ancestor Zhu. Tired of fighting, lost money and moved out. Master Shanzu pleaded with Zhu Nai and saved the fairy hairpin city. But Eugene couldn't think of anything. The man in front of him was called Xiao Imo, but he used to chase and kill Yang Ji, who was also one of the old thrones. Then Zhu Wei came over after hearing the news and rushed to help Yang Ji, and Xiao Imo took his sword and evacuated. Xiao Imo reached out and grabbed the fat man's arm and asked with a smile, "Senior Gusu, why don't we choose a secluded place and learn from each other?" The fat man snorted and sneered, "Wait a moment." Then he turned his head to look at Zhong Kui, coughed a few times and screamed like a pig in a thunderous manner, and shouted with Zhong Kui, "Brother Zhong, help me." Xiao Imo had to let go of his hand and gave up the idea of inviting this ghost into a drunken land flying sword world. After talking and practicing, the other party lay on the ground with a disagreement, waiting for the soles of the shoes to fall on his face. Xiao Imo is not stingy in dealing with such a mess, but he still doesn't have enough experience in the arena. The fat man rubbed his arms, his eyes were sad. Mr. Xiao Imo so vigorously. A man who can bend and stretch, what a little cheek is. Pei Qian rubbed his eyebrows and looked at this fat man with a little admiration. At first glance he was hungry. Cui Dongshan started to favor this fat man a bit. He was a talent. I have to find a chance to persuade Eugene to go to the Middle-earth Confucian temple to play and roll, cry, make troubles and hang himself. Anyway, let the Confucian temple return to the place of cultivation, and then let Eugene put it on the side of Xindu Mountain. Xindu Mountain can take care of it. Eugene only needs give Qingping Jianzong a sum of immortal money on a regular basis, and everything is easy to discuss. It's just that Zhong Kui didn't pay attention to Eugene at all. He focused on investigating Qin Pingan's soul. After a while he frowned and asked, "If this is the case, why not stay in the Great Wall of Jianqi?" Qin Pingan's 3 souls and 7 souls really had a big problem. To make Qin Pingon leave the Great Wall of Jianqi where he had to consume his energy and spirit all the time just like a deal. It is also due to the physique of the Wufu of the end of the world, full of vitality, strong muscles and bones, which can nourish the spirit, coupled with the sword repair's life-flying sword, can naturally nurture the physique. If Qin Pingon was only a far-traveler Wufu, he would have long been skinny and strong withered up. Zhong Kui once saw a portrait on the side of the Confucian temple. Above the city there is a bright red robe. The figure of the person holding the knife is vague. It is no longer a flesh and blood body, like it is composed of thousands of silk threads crisscrossed. In Zhong Kui's view that's called a miserable can't bear to see. Originally being in the fairyland he could stabilize his soul, but after a trip to the barren hinterland and Tuyue mountain he fell again. Stay there but I can't settle down and practice well. Qin Pingon shook his head and said, what's more, it's not a too loss-making business. After all, I can strengthen my physique. The reason why I was able to stay in Taiping within a few days. The end of the mountain's entrance to the mountain comes to a large extent from this one's own ask yourself with punches. Zhong Kui angrily smiled and said, just a little bit of a crime? Qin Pingon smiled and said, if you don't have to suffer hardship when practicing boxing, just get used to it. Seeing that Zhong Kui had no intention to stop, Qin Pingon had to remind him softly, it's okay, don't be aggressive. Zhong Kui looked solemn and was silent. Qin Pingon was about to raise his hand and push away Zhong Kui's, pulse-taking 2 fingers. The inside of his physique is like a stone grinding jade, always grinding 3 souls and 6 souls. Jade scraps are splashing all over, and Zhong Kui is trying to stop the sharp rotation of the grinding wheel with his hands. It is equivalent to a questioning sword. Zhong Kui glared at Qin Pingon. Despise me? Half-human not ghost fun? Qin Pingon joked. Since you are friends, you can't share the blessings and share the difficulties? Zhong Kui said solemnly, open your palms. Qin Pingon hesitated. Zhong Kui didn't give Qin Pingon a chance to refuse. He had already stamped his foot, like a stone slammed into the long river of time. A scene of water ripples appeared under his feet, and the waterways were layered on top of each other and finally showed a backward trend. Zhong Kui, who partitioned Yuming into 2 heavens and earth, showed the image of the law. He was dressed in a red official robe. He sighed and condensed into a vermilion ink ingot that seemed to be specially used for reviewing official documents. Zhong Kui put his fingers together again. Brush the ink, make a pen with your hand, and say something in your mouth. The words are all obscure old sayings, which helped Qin Pingon draw an anchor in the palm of his hand. When you're done, Zhong Kui let out a hey. It's a ghost symbol. Qin Pingon shook his palms and the whole person seemed to be less sloppy. It's like taking off a piece of Jinqi, half a caddy and 82 talisman from the Yang family medicine store. At this moment, even if I sit still in place, I still feel the sense of relief and wind protection. Qin Pingon took a deep breath, twisted his wrist, smiled brightly and said, thank you. Zhong Kui said with no good air, so see outside. Qin Pingon ridiculed. If I'm not polite with you, I'm sure I will slander again. I can't be a human being. Mr. Accountant in the world, how many people do not have a small belly? Scold others first and be invincible. One more irritating remark was often out of the question and his success fell short. All the truths he had worked so hard before were all killed in battle. If you say less nonsense, misunderstandings arise. People are full of weeds, suspicion, disappointment, resentment, one after another. Only the old rivers and lakes just speak. We meet, get off the horse to drink wine, encounter injustice and kill people in the city. Zhong Kui said, my anchor will not last too long, at most a year or a half, but it's okay, I'll look for you again later. Qin Pingon calculated the time and said, in the middle of next year, I may travel to the Middle-earth divine continent. I will trouble you to take a trip to Xindu Mountain at that time. Zhong Kui nodded, maybe I can drop in. Zhong Kui said softly, let me say a few words that are not so festive. Qin Pingon nodded. If there is no engraving you will be miserable. Don't forget the confrontation between the 2 worlds. The first person to say that you want to fight is you. Not even the Saint of Rights. Assume that on the wild battlefield if you win more than you win less, fortunately Howren will remember you in the Great Wall of Jianqi more or less well. But if we are like a broken bamboo advancing rapidly and fighting in various places, you will be very miserable. Eugene, this fat man, before there is a saying, It may be an unintentional remark, or it may have been deliberately asked me to remind you, called greed of heaven for oneself. Because you are the last hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, you are equivalent to carrying the exploits of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, no matter what Jinping thinks. What have you done as a hidden official? What to pay once were days it will all become unimportant. But since you have carved words on the city, no matter the future situation is good or bad at least for 100 years, you can stop a lot of gossip. Qin Pingon raised the flask. It's better to drink. Zhong Kui gently touched the hip flask in his hand. Just treat me like a nonsense. I can go in and out of my left ear even if I have heard it. There is something you may need to help. Zhong Kui stood up. Is there a Qinghuang temple nearby? Pray for the gods to worship the Buddha, find Qigong and worship the mountain. Qin Pingon followed up and shook his head and said, there is only one earth temple called Daoshi. The place is not big. I heard that it is quite effective. Let me lead the way. Zhong Kui shook his head and said, no, don't delay your retreat and recuperate. I went there and talked with the master of the land on my own, so I'll go shopping nearby. He slapped the man in the blue shirt next to him on the shoulder, and Zhong Kui said with a grin, there is some wine you dare not drink. Qin Pingon smiled and said, drink flower wine when you drink flower wine. Remember not to use my name to charge the bill. Zhong Kui was choked for a while. What a boy and unaware prophet. Qin Pingon reminded, I advise you not to do this kind of wicked thing. Zhong Kui waved his hand, Uncle Gusu, you have moved the ground. If the fat man received an amnesty, Pai Dian came to Zhong Kui's side. The two of them didn't protect themselves from the wind, but walked like flying, leaving the Xindu mountain boundary. Qin Pingon watched Zhong Kui go away, cast Yunshui body, and then returned to the Chongqundongtian where the entrance guard was set at Qingping Peak and continued to retreat. After making sure that there was no one around, the fat man whispered, I've found out the water is very deep. Zhong Kui was too lazy to talk. The fat man immediately changed his words. Brother Qin saved a big share of possessions at a young age. It's gratifying and congratulatory. I also feel warm in my heart and I am happy for him. Congratulations, right? Zhong Kui asked with a smile. Is there nothing left of your belongings on your old lair? It used to be an ascending ghost somehow and it must have a good family background. When Eugene was found by Ning Yao and forced out of the nest, it was an embarrassing escape. Maybe it happened suddenly and he was cut off guard by a sword. The fat man didn't carry anything on his body. So during this period on the day, it really wasn't Eugene pretending to be poor on Zhong Kui's side. The fat man really had no money. Eugene stomped his feet with anger and said with sorrow, Zhong Kui, why sprinkle salt on the wound? If you scholars are willing to don't want the dough and ask for money harder than the merchants, can you give me the leftovers? Some leftovers? The fat man became more and more angry, beat his chest vigorously, howling dryly, heart is like a knife, heartache, heartache. Zhong Kui kept walking and said in a huff, okay, it doesn't make sense to cry poorly with me. It's not that I want to be the guest of Qingping Jianzong. Money can make ghosts grind, but in that dark grinding thing, it can be more permeating. The fat man continued on his way and asked, if you really give money, do you deserve it? Zhong Kui smiled and said, I'm just giving a suggestion whether it will work or not. I said it and didn't count it. Just listening to the implication, this fat guy must have a lot of private money. On the other side of the Confucian temple, digging 3 feet in the ground, can't search all of them? Or do you mean that there were countless treasures in your hometown? The fat man was a master who didn't see rabbits or scatter eagles. He reached out and grabbed Zhong Kui's arm and said, Zhong Kui, you have to give me the right words. Suddenly Eugene always felt something wrong, but no matter how the fat man thought about it, he didn't have the slightest clue. Perceiving a change in the fat man's mood around him, Zhong Kui asked, what's wrong? Eugene shook his head vigorously. It's weird, I always feel that something is wrong. Zhong Kui glanced at the fat man with pity in his eyes. You don't mess with someone, you want to provoke Pei Qian. Eugene doubted, that little girl? I look very polite. Zhong Kui smiled and said, believe me, when you arrive at the Temple of the Earth, please respect the Master of the Earth. On the side of Xindu Mountain, Pei Qian asked doubtfully, Big Brother is going to travel far? Cui Dongshan nodded and said, bring Xiaomao and visit the immortals together to try your luck. Pei Qian said, Master, if you ask, I will explain it. This is the tacit fellowship. So the white-clothed boy and the yellow hat and blue shoes put aside their business, went to the sea together and went to explore the old bottom in a sneaky way. Riding Dragon Alley. Huang Hu at the New Year's Eve shop, Cui Peanut at the Chowtu shop. Two small benches, one large and one small sitting side by side. The white-haired boy began to imply that he had a very good relationship with a certain shop, and he could help buy rouge gouache with a 10% discount. If you have a few more words, you have a chance to get a 20% discount. Cui Peanut finally couldn't help it anymore, just forget it once or twice. How can you cheat me so hard? It's not easy for me to make some money now. What's more, my brother is not around. Although Zhao Denggao and Sister Jiu in the shop are both good people, they are seeking a living in a foreign land after all, and there is no one to rely on. If there is no private money in their pockets, how can they be made? The white-haired boy abducted most of his wages. The girl angrily said, "Do you treat me as a fool?" The white-haired boy smiled and said, "You are not stupid either." Today Bai Xian took Yao Xiaoyan away from the worship platform and came to the small town. Otherwise she would not dare to go down the mountain alone. Yao Xiaoyan was greedy and she wanted to buy some cakes from the New Year's Eve shop, not to mention that there was a master who wanted to honor her at the shop. Although Bai Xian couldn't speak well, he still had a little way of doing things. Arriving outside the shop, the white-haired boy stood up with his hands on his hips. Ha smiled and said, "Good boy." The little girl laughed and said, "Good master." Look, the family of both the master and the apprentice love each other in many ways. After Bai Xian held his hands, the stall inside the pavilion hadn't been opened for many days. Even if he couldn't compare to King Sun Chun, who didn't know what to do except for practicing swords, he was more than 7 or 8 Yao Xiaoyan. Isn't this about to break the border soon? Just come here to hang around in the small town. Who dares to provoke the uncle Bai Xian? Please come, you'll be invincible single-handedly. 3 under 5 divided by 2 Feijian swish swish. It's a pity that Brother Jia is not in the shop now. He listened to the right guard at the gate of the mountain and said that he was promoted. Huang Zhu smiled and said, "Yeah, isn't this Brother Bai?" After Bai Xian was still holding his hands, he nodded, crossed the threshold and began to inspect the business situation of the shop. The white-haired boy and Yao Xiaoyan asked, "How did you practice the 7 or 8 sword books that your teacher threw to you?" Yao Xiaoyan grimaced, "It's hard to learn. I thought I was going to be trained, but I never thought that." The gray-haired boy touched the little girl's head, admiringly said, "Very good, follow master." Naturally, the female cultivator who was exempting the palace at that time really wanted to talk about the qualifications of cultivation. She and that person, the difference between the two sides is more than 10,000 miles. So the ancestor of the hidden official threw this little confusion to himself. It was really wonderful. Bai Xian bent his fingers, knocked on the counter and said to the little mute who was standing on the small bench, "Ah, bring the account books, I want to check the accounts." The little dumb looked dumb, raised his head and moved his lips slightly. "Look at the mouth shape, it's a roll call." Bai Xian sighed, really a little mute. Bai Xian asked casually, "Where is the treasurer of Shi?" Amma continued to pretend to be deaf and dumb. Bai Xian didn't have the same knowledge as the little dumb, turned around to get a piece of cake and said vaguely, "Yao Xiaoyan, it's on your account, I can't accompany you on a trip for nothing." Yao Xiaoyan screamed outside the door and started to pay. The white-haired boy was pleased with his expression. As expected of my good disciple, doing things magnificently. "Master, don't you eat some cakes?" "It's my honor to respect master." The white-haired boy stared. "No matter how poor the master is, I can't have a poor ambition." Bai Xian turned his head and yelled, "Old girl Hong Ho, do you want apricot flour cake? There is not much left. If you don't want it, I will eat it all." Outside the door immediately opened his throat and replied, "Leave me $2. The white-haired boy suddenly turned his head, and at the corner of the street, a sword fairy Mida came. There is also a dull-looking little girl around her who seems to be King Sun Chun. Fengyuan fairy was about to set off at Nujiadu to go to Baijiluzu. Miu came over and called Bai Xian to board the boat together. Bai Xian ate the cakes, clapped his hands, said goodbye to Yao Xiaoyan, and asked if she needed to her back to the sword platform. The little girl said no, there is a master. Bai Xian left the shop and followed Miu to Nujiadu. When he arrived on the ferry, Bai Xian Kai asked with curiosity in his heart, "The dead fish eyes have followed, why don't you go to the next sect with us?" Miu sternly said, "It is the hidden officer who called you to participate in the next celebration." In addition, Nuan Shu, Zhao Xuxia, Zhao Luan, and Yao Xiaoyan they may not rush to Xindu Mountain. Guizhuzhou and millet grains are now very well mixed. They visit the mountains and watch the door together every day and enjoy it. After Bai Xian held his hands, he hummed and said in a deep voice, "Sure enough, the hidden official still values me, the little hidden official most." Miyu nodded with a smile. In fact, Bai Xian has been looking at Miyu from the corner of his eye. There will be no fraud, right? Miyu curled his lips. Bai Xian hesitated. "Miyu, you have to swear to me it was not that Pei Qian called me over, or I would go back to the sword stand and practice sword." Miyu raised a palm. "I can swear it's definitely not that Pei Qian is making trouble for you." Bai Xian laughed loudly. "I'm still afraid that she won't make it?" Miyu smiled without saying anything. This kid Bai Xian owns a flying sword named Wandering. The heavenly granted, magical powers of this flying sword are a willow leaf with Jiang Shangzhen. They have the same effect and are good at exchanging injuries for their lives. If it is a fight between sword repairs, it will take advantage. That's the case with Jianxiu, let alone dealing with other Qi practitioners. It's a pity that he was born in the Great Wall of Sword Qi, but it was tasteless, so in his early years at the Summer Palace he had no choice but to have a Bing Xia rank. Coupled with the number of natal flying swords, it is no better than a small abacus and little confusion, because Nalan Jade has 2 natal flying swords, Xingguishan and Flower Lantern, both offensive and defensive. Yao Xiaoyan is the only swordsman in the lower 5 realm with 3 flying swords at the same time among the 9 peers, Chunshan, Cobweb, and Neon Clothes. Despite being nicknamed Little Confusion by Bai Xian, Yao Xiaoyan is among the 9 sword fairy embryos, the sword repairer who has the most hope to securely enter the Jade Pu realm. On the other hand, King Sun Chun and Bai Xian, although they will definitely be among the Golden Core and Yuan Ying earlier, but Yao Xiaoyan has more advantages than the smooth and secure of breaking through the border. So poor Uncle Bai Xian, he still feels that he has average aptitude, but compared to the lower aptitude when he first left his hometown and met the hidden officer, Bai Xian has learned something afterwards. And Bai Xian is not stupid. I was on the side of the sword platform before, following a group of people of the same age to practice swords. Sui Right occasionally pointed out, more or less knowing his aptitude not bad. The Fengyuan ferry stayed at the Changchun Palace ferry for a while, and the teacher was still responsible for winning the relationship on the mountain. Miyu didn't get off the boat but just stood by the railing. On the ferry besides Chai Wu there were a few more similar children. Bai Xian, who didn't recognize anyone as a master. King Sun Chun is temporarily an anonymous disciple of Ning Yao. And Mi's new disciple He Gu. King Sun Chun is still withdrawn, but Bai Xian and Chai Wu seem to have a better temperament. They don't talk much but they often get together, one for tea and the other for drinking with companions. Miyu is still very optimistic about King Sun Chun. He is talented and works hard. He likes to compete with himself on the way of practice, but he doesn't know if this little girl has anything to do with Sun Jiyuan. Miyu had never heard of such a sword fairy embryo before being brought to the world by the hermit. But it's normal. The youngest generation of the Great Wall of Jianqi was of course led by Ning Yao. In addition to Chen Sanqiu, Dong Huafu and the others, there is also Qi Shou and the others, as well as Gao Yeho and Pang Yuanji. Although they are young, they are too dazzling. It is a well-deserved big year. Younger ones are the little hidden officials, Qin Li and Guizhuzhou. Originally, children like Bai Xian and Sun Chun Wang were in the same generation as Qin and Li. If it weren't for that war, these kids, in a few years or so, it would be their turn to guard the gate and take care of the sword repairs in the foreign country. In a room, as the host, Chai Wu lifted the hip flask and shook it towards Bai Xian and He Gu, probably asking if he wanted to drink together. Bai Xian raised the teapot in his hand, He Gu waved his hand and Chai Wu poured himself a bowl of wine. He Gu asked, "Bai Xian, the chief worshipper and the master of the law, which one is the most important?" On the side of Luopa Mountain, Zhou Fei, sister Changming, couldn't show who was the official. In the Xindu Mountain of the Xiazong, Miyu is the chief worshipper and Cui Wei is the master. Among the 9 children, He Gu, the tallest one, had his natal flying sword named Fei Lai Feng, and his natal magical powers were similar to those of Wuyue Mountain monarchs. The He family is not considered a wealthy family in the Great Wall of Jianqi, so it could not have a house on Taixiang Street or Yuhu Street, but the background is not shallow. The ancestors of Jianxiu belonged to the line of criminal officials. When Haosu became the last criminal officer anyway, there was no such thing as nothing. Gu had a short sword studying maidservant, hanging from his waist, which was an ancestral thing. Bai Xian raised Erlang's legs and said, "If you follow the seat arrangement on the side of Jisifeng, the position of the chief worshipper is more expensive, but the ancestors in charge of the law are more powerful." Big. At the bow, Miyu was lying on the railing, listening to Cui Dongshan talking about something privately, that Mi Xiefeng only Jianxiu can cliff it. Miyu has already begun to look forward to the Luopa Mountain and Qingping Jianzong in 100 years. Grandmasters come forth in large numbers and sword celestials gather. The future can be expected and the future will come. Sword of Coming Chapter 899. A group of people disembarked at the Xianxia ferry crossing called Moxiandu. The ferry is crowded with buildings, but most of them are newly built after the war. It's like a small town. There is a small river running through the town. The water is quiet, the water waves are not thriving, and the river water. There are many shops on both sides of the strait, but the business is deserted. The reason why the ferry has this name comes from the early years of the ferry. There was a strange aquarium at the ferry. Like an ink line swimming in groups, the ink lines winding through the water like mountains one by one, but after the war there is no such aquatic figure in the river, so the ink line crossing is no longer worthy of its name. Huang Yiyun took his disciple Xue Huai as well as 2 Pushun guests to participate in the opening ceremony on Xindu Mountain. The old women and young girls beside Yi Yunyun are the owners of the tea shed that has an engagement shop on the banks of the Jilin River. The old woman is a pseudonym Chudu and she is an old Chiu. She has nearly 5,000 years of age. She was born as the teacher of the old Dadu Dragon Palace. She belongs to the first class, emperor and clothes minister. She is humble and powerful. Half of the master of the law, the girl's name is Hu Chuling. Her father and mother have both surnames, and her nickname is Vinegar. She is different from the old woman, but she is not a member of Shanzi's spirits, but from the local people of Chilinjiang. Her ancestors are all proficient in water-based quarrying. The girl is a first-class fairy material. She has been examined by the old woman due to fate, qualification, temperament and character. In the end, he was accepted as a direct disciple. In fact, the two sides are more like relatives who depend on each other for life, or the kind of intergenerational relatives. Chiodu was cautious. After the old real Long Hushan and the sword fairy in Qingshan left, she did not leave the Chilinjiang boundary immediately, but took the initiative to take a trip to Pushun Yunkatang. On the one hand, she was with that Huang Yun. "Thank you, I brought gifts to the door and sent thousands of kilograms of Chilinjiang measure in one breath, and now Tongyi's Hao, whether it is a local or a foreign monk, they are not very friendly to the demon race and there are special training men from other continents. In groups, search for mountains and rivers, hunting and killing fish that slip through the net on a large scale. The Wild Monster Clan, based on this to make money, can also get an extra credit for recording files at the academy." Yunkatang received the gift and appreciated it, so she repaid her with a peach, and Yi Yunyun wrote a letter and sent it to the head of Qingshan of the Dafu Academy. "This is a guarantee for the old Chiu. This is a lot of incense." Once Chiu Du went out to travel, Pu Shan and Yi Yunyun need to be held responsible at the college for any mistakes during the period. Later, Yunkatang received a letter from Feijian. The writer claimed to be Cui Dongshan from Xiandushan Qin Pingan's proud disciple, and wanted to invite the old woman and the young girl, the master and apprentice, to be a guest at home. At the end of the letter, besides the seal, there was one party self-use seal and a private monogram shaped like 3 mountains. Yi Yunyun told the old woman, who happened to be a guest in the mountain, that the sect was about to be established on Xindu Mountain, and the first sovereign kindly invited the 2 masters and apprentices to visit Xindu Mountain. The intention to solicit is very obvious. After Chiu Du learned of this, after thinking about it, he felt that he should take a walk with the Vinegar to see Xindu Mountain, and then make a decision. "I have been imprisoned for thousands of years and now I want to go out and relax. It would be a good thing if I could help the Vinegar to find a strong identity on the mountain. It's just that being the immortal master who is included in the Golden and Jade genealogy of the Patriarch Hall, there are many rules. Shackled, so it's best to be a guest. It is not only a talisman but at the same time the restraint is still small." Yi Yunyun hasn't told Chiu Du about Qin Pingan's multiple identities. The lord of a sect of Luopa Mountain in Beipingzu, Wensheng's close disciple, the last hermit of the Great Wall of Jianqi, And of course he is also a Taoist companion of Ningyao. Anyway, waiting to visit Xindu Mountain together, it will soon be revealed. When Yi Yunyun showed up at the ferry, some of the roadside bag houses who were originally sick and waiting for business to come shouted louder. The shop assistants also bypassed the counter, came to the door and began to whistle. It's just that I don't know who is the first to recognize the identity of the woman, and when she shouts out Pushun Huang Yiyun, one by one will be silent like a bird and beast scattered. Annoyed, a woman stop-bound martial artist, and it is estimated that she hits it casually in 2s and 3s, and there is no ink line crossing. Yi Yunyun glanced at the river where there was no more ink line vision, and asked casually, Mother Chiu, that kind of aquatic race has been thriving here for many years, and now I can't see any of them. Is it because the wild monster race has grabbed and died? Glancing not far away, there was a young shopkeeper sitting in the sun at the entrance of her shop. After both sides looked at each other, the old woman didn't say anything in her heart and said with a smile, It's all hiding. This kind of aquarium really has a negative name. The fish is one of the descendants of Mo Jiao. It is not recorded in the book, so the reputation of later generations is not obvious, because the old Dadulong Palace has long been removed from the water-descendant jade, which caused the secular monarch to not be able to seal it. Even if the water is successful, it will destined to be unable to transform the Jiao. This is the road to sever, can only linger. In the early years, there was a negative mountain fish that was about to transform into a fairy, and the relationship with a land-lake dragon palace on the side branch of Dadu was very stale. In desperation, I had to take a chance and secretly chose a thunderstorm in the yellow plum season. Without telling the Dadu Dragon Palace, I walked the water without authorization, hoping to produce a golden pill, but somehow the news was leaked, and it was stumbled by people, which accidentally caused floods. The 2 banks along the way were flooded for more than 1,000 miles, and there were more than thousands of floating corpses in the water. Thousands of crimes, the guilt was great, so he was charged with 1 case. When the Dada Dragon King learned of it, he was greatly furious. The Shui people in his own jurisdiction dared to violate the law of heaven. If the party is in trouble, he must be detained and beheaded. Negative Shanyu had to abscond all the way to this place, and took refuge in a mountain repairman with luck. Sure hide its breath to avoid the calamity. In return, it had to help that school to gather the fairy water transport quietly, and wait until the Battle of Zhanlong was over before it dared to show up. The young man asked in his heart, You old lady, you are so kind. Since you are both of the great descent of the descent, you can be regarded as half Taoists on the mountain. Even if you don't support each other, why bother to make things difficult? Why, because now I hug my thighs. Are you planning to take me to ask Huang Yiyun and Dafu Academy for credit? This trip to the Moxiandu, is it rushing to me? The old woman replied with a heartfelt smile. A little negative mountain fish has not been able to walk the river to turn into a black dragon. Fortunately, it has been here to form a pill and has been stagnant in the nascent soul realm for so many years. If you know my identity, you dare not dare. Such a blatant rhetoric. Don't go to the old almanacs. Since you just said it yourself, we are both blasphemy remnants. We can be regarded as half of the same way. Also, since you didn't go astray and took refuge in the wild, then it'll be nice. 1 word of persuasion. Report to Dafu Academy as soon as possible. Otherwise wait. The gentleman in the academy came to the door, but it was too late. Of course, if you are willing to switch to Pushun, I can help introduce 1 or 2 now. In the early years, this negative mountain fish was able to escape the questioning of Xianxia from Dadu Dragon Palace. In fact, it was also attributed to the plea of Mo Jiao. The old woman then took the place of the dragon girl to slow her cheeks. Otherwise, a small mountain where an earth fairy sits can really shelter? The young man sneered. The man is not a servant of a skirt. Yi Yunyun also saw the clue. Mother Chiu, what did you chat with him? The old woman smiled. Little negative mountain fish, his heart is higher than the sky and he doesn't want to cling to others. Yi Yunyun smiled. I finally recovered my free body. Anyway, I am still a Yuaning monk. As long as he is innocent, he is in the academy. After the side inspection, you can occupy the mountains and stand by the water. Since you are the backer, you really don't have to rely on anyone. The old woman around him is an exception, and she is used to being a servant of the Dragon Palace. If the monk's realm is not enough, you can start a mountain and establish a faction. This is a recognized thing on the mountain. Many new sects tend to be lively in the early stage and then short-lived. Just like his own Yunkatang, even if Zhonglu Tanrong entered the upper 5 realms and then left Pushun, it would be impossible to open a sect, and the old Yuanying would never think of such a thing. In history, those founding generals who have the skills to support dragons and are well known in history are also the same, not wanting, unwilling and unable. The young man seemed to have changed his mind temporarily, and suddenly said with his own heartfelt heart to the old woman, "Auntie wife with a big tone, you can talk to Huang Yun. If you are willing to become a Taoist couple, I can enter Zuepu Mountain." The old woman laughed blithely. However, she didn't tell Yi Yunyun the truth. In other words, it roughly means that this fellow Taoist negative mountain has been admiring the Lord for a long time. Yi Yunyun smiled and laughed. After strolling through the various shops in the ferry crossings of the gates, Yi Yunyun made up her mind and couldn't buy it. She finally found a secluded place. She took out a piece of origami from her sleeve. The multicolored paper boats were thrown into the ink line crossing the river water, as if Xiaowan fell into the sea, and the river shook gently, and finally suddenly appeared a top-grade talisman boat, which was like a high-rise boat 2 stories high and could carry more than 30 people. Compared with Luxiazu, which is expensive and has no market, the Color Luan ferry is the first choice for the immortal children on the Tonggishao mountain. Of course, the premise is that they can afford Gu Yes money, and it is not suitable for long voyages. Next, the private ferry will traverse an old dynasty's southern border mountains and rivers. It is about 2,000 miles away from Xindu Mountain. If it is an ordinary boat and car, the distance will be at least doubled. The ferry lifts off, the earth, mountains and rivers are like bonsai. Yi Yunyun was standing on the bow of the ship, her sleeves flabby, and she was in a heavenly attitude. Xue Huai glanced at the master, only one thought: the future master is too difficult to find. Pushun is busy with business, so Zhonglu Tanrong will come later. When Lao Yuanying learned that Master Chao, who had visited her daughter-in-law and Wanshishai before, was actually the real master of the Yinpu of Baijin Immortal and the Yinpu of Jianxian, Lao Zhonglu almost didn't stare his eyes out, and waited until Tanrong returned to God. "Come, it's spitting all over," began to complain about his own mountain master. Why didn't he say it earlier? Otherwise he wouldn't have to prepare the 4 treasures of the study and a lot of plain seals. Put the young hidden official on the chair and not let him go? Yi Yunyun is not easy to explain. She actually only knew the true identity of Master Chao before him. Lao Zhongli was like a lady who was abandoned by the beginning and the end, with faint eyes and babbling words, complaining constantly on Yi Yunyun's side. The mountain owner mistaken me. If he knew the identity of the other party early, and the young hidden official did not leave a few angry drenching calligraphy, and then engraved more than a dozen engraved seals all night long, Qin Pingon would not want to leave the study in Pushun. It's okay now, and I missed a once-in-lifetime opportunity. Remedy: how to remedy it? When Tanrong turned my head and arrived at Xindu Mountain, it was the outsiders and guests. How could I speak so much? The owner is confused. Mountain Lord, don't leave, you have to compensate me for this loss. As for how to ask the young hermit for the calligraphy seal, it's the Mountain Lord's business. Anyway, I just accept the gift. If the ritual is over, the Mountain Lord is empty-handed when you go down the mountain. This is exhausting. A good job of mastering. Tan has long been worried about him. Yi Yunyun is not afraid of Tanrong's threat, but she really doesn't understand the old monks like Tanrong. In the face of Qin Pingon, she refuses to be obsessed with the young sword immortal's deployment of troops in the Summer Palace in the past years, only on the issue of printing. Mind. Yi Yunyun had a slight headache. She gathered the sound to form a line and discussed with her disciple Xue Huai. Do you really want me to go to Xindu Mountain and ask Qin Pingon for a seal? I can't open this mouth, why don't you go? Xue Huai smiled and said, Master, it is not difficult for me to speak, but this matter, the starting point is too high. It is Pushun that the hidden officer took the initiative to visit. It has invisibly boosted Tanzangla's appetite, so I want to watch it. It's a matter of 1 or 2 sentences. Perceiving the change in Master's face and thinking about Master's temper, Xue Huai immediately changed his words. If Master is really embarrassed, it's a big deal that I will start with Master Qin Shan. While provoking the conversation, when the time comes, the Master echoes a few words. I believe that Qin Shan's personality will definitely not make Master embarrassed by Tanzanglu. Then Xue Huai helped Tanrong make the rounds. Tanzanglu has been obsessed with calligraphy, gold and stone in this life, and he may be more concerned about 2 things than practice. It's like a young poet who saw the most proud man in the world, the descendants of the poet, and saw Suzy and Lu Qi. Master still has to understand a bit. As for the angry words that Tanzanglu threatened Master, don't take it seriously, it's just asking for prices. Having said this, Xuehuai laughed. Master, it's better to make a bet with the two of us. I bet that Master Chen Shan must have been prepared for this matter. Maybe he is waiting for Master or Tanzanglu to speak. Yi Yunyun did not speak up, but asked curiously, Xuehuai, do you have a good impression of Qin Pinyin? Xuehuai smiled and said, they are all scholars. It is fortunate to follow Master to practice in Pushan, participate in various ceremonies, and I have seen many outsiders, but it is the first time I have seen a monk like Qin Shanju, and it is very refreshing. Since, if you must describe Qin Shanju in one sentence, it is. After a moment's pause, the old master nodded and said with a smile, it looks as if it is looking, and it is also warm, respectful, and peaceful. Yi Yunyun said, very high evaluation. At the end of the new year, there is still half a month away from the sect celebration. The reason why Yi Yunyun rushed to Xindu Mountain ahead of time was selfish. She wants to be open and honest with Qin Pingan. Yi Yunyun is extremely young among the martial artists of the end, Wu Tan the martial sage of her hometown, Zhang Tiaoxiao from the Middle-earth Shenzhou, the old man Gong Wang from Luzhou in Beiju, and Pei Xiang from the Leigong Temple in Iazhao. Not too small. Yi Yunyun really wants to know a pure martial artist who can question Cao Xiai and who is the same age as Cao Xiai. How heavy is the fist and kick, how big is the boxing theory, and how high is the boxing technique? On the color boat, when it sailed into the sea of clouds, the surrounding water was filled with fog, which made people feel refreshed. The old woman had gray hair and a rickety figure. In the past years, I also held a golden emperor's rain symbol, showing his true body, soaring through the clouds and driving the fog, spreading rain for the earth, mountains and rivers, and raining rain. The side carries a hand stove in both hands. Because of its small size, it is also known as the sleeve stove. It is made of copper with built-in charcoal and woven bamboo strips. A group of people overlooked the earth, sparsely populated and still green mountains and green water did not change its color, but along those big rivers, the towns of Xianxia, which were built by the water in the past, are still mostly ruins, devastated and horrible. Yi Yunyun couldn't help asking, Dun Yuan hasn't regained the country yet? Otherwise, with the background of the old Dayun dynasty after so many years of recuperation, how could it not be so lifeless and lifeless? She increasingly felt that Yunkatang would not only lift the ban on Shanshui Dibao, but also set up a special organization to collect various Shanshui Dibao. Xuehuai sighed and explained the reason for the master. The original Yuan dynasty of the Yuan family had already fallen apart. Now the land of the mountains and rivers is divided into three. The three offspring of the imperial family who were born only from the domain of the feudal clan are supported as emperors, and the soil is broken. Founding of the country, the Yuan family was also Tongyi's Hao, one of the few dynasties under the mountain that dared to many-arm as a car. They gathered armies in the border and the capital to resist the wild monsters that swept the mountains and rivers like tides. The result is only it was the place where the city was slaughtered, including the capital, and there were as many as 7 places, and the lives were burnt and the vitality was severely injured. Therefore, compared with the Yu dynasty of the past, it can no longer be compared. The ruins of the old capital city have become veritable ghost towns everywhere. The evil spirits are soaring up into the sky, except for ghost repairs. Qi practitioners under the earth immortals generally detour and don't touch the mold. In addition to a few groups of academies led by gentlemen and sages, together with the genealogical monks on various hills, they entered various ghost towns to search for hidden monsters. In fact, the 3 separatist forces have also spared no effort to send in shrines and clear the way, with a large number of training talents. The guards entered the city to gather the corpses, spent a lot of talisman and god's money, and also held a few water and land ceremonies to extradite the dead, but the results were not great. In addition, there is only Yamazawa Yeshio, who will pick up leaks under the guise of searching for mountains. Although some of the old mansions of the wealthy clan are dilapidated, there may be some unexpected gains and they will strictly follow the sunrise. The rules of going out of the city at sunset moment, otherwise you will be trapped in a lot of obstacles. It is easy to have no return. Ghosts hit the wall in the city and become new ghosts. Ordinary martial arts fighters, young men with strong yang spirits, would never dare to enter without permission, At most they would lay hands on those casual practitioners, do some deeds in the city and get some dividends afterwards. And most of them are in the midsummer, the days when the sun is in full bloom in the chosen heaven and the earth, and most of them have to stay away from the ghost town for at least 100 miles at the end of winter like the current cold and freezing weather. Yi Yunyun asked, "We Pushun disciple, haven't we been here?" Although most of his Pushun disciples are in the southern boundary of Tonggishao, they cooperated with the two academies in Yuguizhong to search the mountains, but when Yi Yunyun saw the ghost town of Jiyu's mountains and rivers, she was still a little worried. Shui Huai shook his head lightly and said truthfully, "I haven't been here yet. Tongyezhou is too big, almost equal to the territory of two Aquarius continents. Besides, Tongyezhou does not have the Dali dynasty, and there is no embroidered tiger Cui Yun. There is no invincible iron knight that is invincible, let alone the low eyebrows of the immortal masters on the mountain and the human dynasty. There is no feat of erecting the law of a country on the top of the mountains." Yi Yunyun said, "After participating in the Xindu Mountain Festival, we will walk through these ghost towns to see if there are any ghosts and generals who have already become the weather, and try to gather the Yin soldiers to disturb the Yongjian. Once it happens, the seat of the old Great Yuan dynasty. A ghost city will form a small world similar to the ruins of an ancient battlefield. When living things are in it, they will be subtly affected by evil spirits. Especially when the ghost city has formed a pattern of ties of air, it is even more difficult. Yi Yunyun will not complain about the inaction of the academy. In the three brand new academies, including Dafu Academy, in the years after the end of the war, from the mountain leader and deputy mountain leader, to gentlemen and sages, and even to Confucian scholars in the academy, almost everyone did not talk about studying in any study all year round. Running around and struggling to deal with it, in addition to searching for mountains, in addition to mending old mountains and rivers, it is also a lot of clutter and it is a mess. Everywhere needs the academy to solve hidden dangers, and over the years the students of the academy have suffered no casualties. Less. Shui Huai hesitated and said, "Even if the ghosts in the city are fierce, they are all pitiful and respectable." Yi Yunyun sighed, "Of course I know, it's just the end of the matter, what else can be done, I can't leave the city alone." Yin Ling was soaked by evil spirits year after year, and if he dragged on, even if the burnt academy was able to vacate his hands, he could only clean the ghost town. At that time it would be tantamount to a new massacre. Shui Huai was worried, those ghosts are very troublesome to set up. Not only Tonggishao, in fact, except for the Middle Earth Shenzhou, there are no sects of ghosts and sects, at most they are complicated and not lacking. The bulk of the site can open up several hills alone for ghosts to practice. So now it can be made into a hammer, the feat of fixing the sound, unless it is an ascendant monk who is proficient in ghosts, who will not hesitate to spend his own way and use the means of reaching the sky to perform spells here, and there is hope to turn the breath of heaven and earth from filthy into pure spirit. It's a pity that Tonggishao now has no ascendant realm, let alone a mountain monk who is proficient in ghost ways. But it is said that in the past years an unidentified monk once suddenly appeared on the battlefield of Tonggishao and led an army of heroic spirits to block an army of withered bones under the command of Bai Ying, the wild old throne. Just looking at the old city with broken walls everywhere, even in broad daylight under the sun, it still gives people a ghostly feeling, but there is one thing that makes Yi Yunyun feel quite strange. The city is obviously very evil, but it is filthy. Meaning but not heavy, the old woman and the girl said in their hearts. Jealous, I will tell you in advance when we get to Xindu Mountain, even if you have some good feelings about that side, no matter how good the other party gives, we will be the most imaginary title. Kaching, don't be that worship monk. The girl curiously asked, "Why is this?" The old woman didn't explain much, just touched the girl's head. In fact, it is best for them to simply take refuge in Pushun Yunkatang. Huang Yiyun is trustworthy, and Pushun has an excellent reputation. She is well known on the mountain and down the mountain, especially Yi Yunyun's Taoist heart, like a Wang Qingchuan, clear enough to entrust her life. It is a pity that she and Pu Shan did not take the initiative to speak from beginning to end, and Qiu Du couldn't get on the pole to send himself in the vinegar. On the other hand, the Qingshan sword fairy, who was very young and mastered sword skills, had met by the river before, but he was always gentle and polite in the tea shed. But the old woman couldn't understand the other party's character at all. Moreover, the Xindu Mountain turned a blind eye to these ghost towns entrenched with evil spirits and left it alone. For the monks on the mountain, thousands of miles are just a few steps away from the neighborhood. But on the side of Xindu Mountain, since the sect is about to be established, it must be good. But I can't say that Xindu Mountain is doing something wrong. The dust is rolling, the karma is heavy, the cultivator is clean and self-conscious. Why is it wrong? It's just that the old woman inevitably murmurs in her heart. The vinegar and vinegar are too good. If it is on the Xindu mountainside, the door is not correct and you can make the best use of everything. What will you do? Attaching to a certain Xianxia mountain, it is always easy to get off the boat. In his early years in the Dadu Dragon Palace, Qiu Du was in a position of importance, and he had long been accustomed to the treacherous intrigues between his colleagues, between Shan Tao and the fairy master. The monks in the mountains with bad reputations are not necessarily bad guys. With a good reputation, it may also be a man of integrity and good calculation. With the vinegar and vinegar aptitude for practice, you will never be able to find the end of the temple if you carry a pig's head. Don't say it's Huang Yun's Pushun, maybe even Yu Guozong can become a patriarch's genealogy monk, so jealousy is not a sword repairer. If you suffer a big loss, you will enter Shen's Hufeng and become the master's descendant of Wei Ying. Disciple, it's all possible. Therefore, the old woman will never allow herself to push the vinegar into a fire pit by herself. If it didn't work, she lowered her body and didn't talk about the lack of face. The big deal is to change the tradition of vinegar and vinegar. If you change to a master, she will also help vinegar and vinegar to find an ancestral identity in Pushun Chaotang. Anyway, I can't teach her any Dao skills. With one person, the Dao roots and feet of both the master and the apprentice are completely different. Many of the dragon's genus can master the secrets of life, vinegar and vinegar. Wasted time. The human monk is no better than the demon, and he is too particular about the strength of an early mountaineering. It doesn't matter if you don't have the status of mentor and apprentice. The old woman stretched out her dry palms, gently picked up the girl's sleeves. Her eyes were kind. It's said that apprenticeship is like reincarnation, and women go up the mountain to practice as a married man. The master is so old that it is difficult to prove the avenue. People can be relieved. In addition to this, there is a secret matter. The old woman did not tell the vinegar and vinegar that the ordinary dragon palace, the so-called ruins, is just submerged. However, the Dada Dragon Palace where she is located is different from those on the land and rivers. It has a higher status, so the opening of the ruins is more difficult and extremely difficult to find. Just talk about Mrs. Tan Don Lushui Pit. Once the door was closed, wasn't even Hulong being able to forcibly open the restriction back then? As the teacher of Dadu Dragon Palace, she is similar to the Hanlin Academy bachelors who served as the prince's grandson teacher. Unlike the negative mountain fish that used to be the side branch of Dadu Jinyu, the old woman is of orthodox origin. In short, Qiu Du is the opening dragon, the key to the palace secret. Yi Yunyun didn't mention a word. The old woman believed in her own vision and the other's character. Pu Shan was not putting a long line to catch a big fish. As for the Xindu mountain, it was the Qin Jianxian who walked on his front foot, and then followed an invitation with his back foot. How could the old woman not weigh the pros and cons? So she made up her mind, taking advantage of the real dragon in Aquarius Island before it has been announced to the world. She will gather the world and the abandoned dragon palace, and she must quickly take a trip to hometown and homeland. Naturally, the old woman didn't dare to enter it, so they all regarded it as her own belongings. It was too greedy and inadequate. She would only choose 1 or 2% of the old dragon palace treasures that were easy to carry as a vinegar dowry. In the mountains and rivers of the old Yu dynasty, in a ghost town, there are colored boats passing by. In a dilapidated and ruined mansion, there are 2 gentlemen who have just entered the city. Liang Shangjuan. On the beam between the two there are 2 pots of wine, a dish of salted peanuts and a dish of dried soybeans. The shabby scholar twisted a peanut, threw it high and dropped it into his mouth, then glanced at the fat man on the side and persuaded, "You hurry down and sit down on the beam." The fat man said with anger, "No, the widow's dragon chair can sit on it, but the small beam can't sit on it. This family has smoked from the ancestral grave, so that the widows made of gold can sit here. It is Zhong Kue and Uncle Gus. I've been to the Temple of the Earth before and then wandered here." Inside the ghost town there was a little awe-inspiring spirit. Only then did the spirits of the many Yin spirits in the city maintain a little refreshing aura so that they would not be reduced to evil spirits. It should be the fairy family of the white-clothed boy. The fat man grabbed a handful of soybeans, put them in his mouth and chewed and took another sip of wine. He lifted his head up and gurgled his mouth with water and swallowed his brain. Zhong Kui, why don't you speak to Brother Chen directly? Ask him to help up. Zhong Kui took out the wooden box from his sleeve, put it on his knees and gently pushed open the lid. Inside it was a set of Celestial Master cut ghost money. Zhong Kui twisted one of them to spend money. He sighed and wiped his sleeves. Besides, the creation of the next sect is a great celebration. The thing I want to do is replaced by you. You don't feel bad? The fat man laughed and said, I'm afraid of being rejected, right? Seeing that Zhong Kui cast his sight, the fat man immediately remedied it. Isn't it? It's not that we're going to be with whom, people like me who want face don't show our true feelings over there. Zhong Kui said, in fact it is because I know he will agree and he will not hesitate, so I am embarrassed whether I want to speak or not and when to speak. The fat man sighed, understanding it's like I saw Brother Chen and didn't ask him for anything to offer to Kuching. Our brothers are just thin-skinned, but we really suffer when we go out. Zhong Kui frowned slightly. This group of people dare to stay overnight in the city wanting money without life. The fat man smiled and said, they know the inside story because of that existence, they will only feel that this place is stable, but they don't know that they have already walked on the road of Huangquan. In this ghost city, probably because of too much resentment, he accidentally gave birth to a piece of food. The ghost of the ghost is much more cruel than the so-called ghost house ghosts and ruins ghost kings. The biggest problem is that this ghost is like a gifted monastic embryo. In less than 10 years, it depends on devouring its peers. Has quietly formed a golden pill and acted extremely cautiously. It has not been found by the monks. If it now eats up a lot of people in the sun, especially the soul-nourished spirit trainer and the pure warrior with strong blood, I will give it to its fishing for a few ghost books. Hey, it's estimated that it won't take 30 to 50 years for it to become a climate, and then refining a ghost town into its own small world, waiting for it to walk in the day without hindrance. Just change a pair of vulgar skins. If you want to find the trace, you have to find a needle in a haystack. Otherwise, Zhong Kui wouldn't take my uncle Gusu to stop here. Killing demons and demons is an indispensable responsibility. After Zhong Kui finished drinking a pot of wine, he asked the fat man to put away the dishes, and gently jumped down, like a flying kite flying out of the lobby, splashing on the roof of the building and then suddenly landing, where the beauty outside a woman's boudoir stood by. Sitting on the side looking at the courtyard outside a book building in this mansion from a distance, there is a group of people picking up leaks, a total of more than a dozen people. Half of them are digging 3 feet here, and the rest are searching for cellars, dry wells and secret rooms on the wall. Everyone is very busy. Among them are half-hearted trainers, and there are also rivers and lakes. Wufu, the latter mostly wore armors and were picked up nearby either with a backbow, crossbow or a copper coin sword. Some people were carrying a bag of glutinous rice and a bag of black dog blood. There was a monk with a bell tied to his waist and holding it in his hand. According to the demon mirror, he clearly came prepared. There were also a few wheelbarrows parked outside the gate, because the donkey and horse did not dare to enter the city no matter how they whipped. 7 or 8 jars of silver were dug out and the cheers were thunderous. One of the young men with yellow face and thin skin suddenly said, "You can try to dig down another 10 or 2 feet. Sure enough, under 1 foot, more jars were dug out, and once opened they were all more valuable jewels. The fat man laughed and said, looking at the shape of this mansion before returning to the hometown, he should be the 3rd-grade Beijing official at the center. In the end, he only accumulated so little possessions. He is really an upright official. If he is lucky enough to become a widow of love, no matter what, seal the beautiful posthumous title of a letterhead. On the other side of the yard, there is a beautiful woman about 30 years old. She is a little short, but she is gorgeous, and the material is pure white. Because she is wearing a short nightgown with a waist, she looks more curvy and her skin is better than snow. Chiobwa circulates, his voice is delicate and delicate. Guchio, I really have you today's harvest, you can get an extra 10%. The young man thanked the woman. The fat man leaned on the bowtie's railing, craned his neck, his eyes lighted, and whispered, "This elder sister really behaves like a hazy outsider, making people forget the customs." The rest of the mansion also rushed to the courtyard. At the same time, one of them was holding a huge fire-painted gourd. The key was that it still had a handle and had an excellent appearance. The man and the woman laughed and asked, "Madam, is this a thing used by your gods?" The woman glanced at her and couldn't look at it. There were so many spiritual artifacts on the mountains under the sky, and she said in a bad mood, "Only these wealthy portals who are full and have nothing to do will be treasures and worth a few dollars. You have to ask Guccio, he is an expert." The young man said, "Find a literati who knows the goods. Maybe it's worth 300 or 400 taels of silver, but you can't sell it at Xianxia." The man glanced at the woman, stretched out a palm and touched the gourd with a smile, before he threw the gourd out and hit the wall heavily. The woman cast a wink. "It's like death." The young man felt sorry in his heart and did not dare to say a word. The woman looked quite contented. She really picked up a treasure halfway through. The young man deserves to be a family boy from a country's weaving bureau. He has a very good vision. Otherwise, they would just go into the city this time and they would just bump into the city like a headless fly. Estimated to harvest the least halved. Another person squatted at the bottom of the steps with a big sack, rummaged and picked it up, and asked the ancient Chio to verify the price one by one. The valuable ones were left behind and the worthless ones were smashed. He took out a wide-mouthed one. Celadone ware, famille rose lotus and heron pattern, and used too. Just looking at the possible value of some money, he asked the young man, "Is it a vase?" "Slag bucket." "What the hell? It's worthless." At the top of the steps, a burly man in armor was sitting on a rosewood chair, his hands leaning on a knife. His face was scarred and his appearance was quite hideous. He stepped on a single Nanmu couplet, the previous ancient hill. Said, "This thing is quite valuable. It is you family, the handwriting of a former literary master in the dynasty, if paired, can sell for at least 500 or 600 taels of silver." The man couldn't bear the eyebrows of his wife and this little white face, so he stepped on it and cracked it. The man glanced at the sky and said in a deep voice, "You can go back to the house." The group of them came to this old state office when it was summer this year, looking for something left from the mouths of the immortal masters. Yes, the unexpected joy, extremely smooth compared to the many unexpected surprises of my peers in other ghost towns. It has been confessed many of their lives have not been seriously damaged yet. There are only some lonely ghosts wandering in the city at night. They chose a Ziqinghuang temple as a habitat, and the ghosts dare not get close at night. But half a year of hard work, full of calculations, converted into fairy money, has already earned a small amount of money. Zhong Kui glanced at a small house in the city, where a young girl leaned against a peach tree and stood with a peach blossom face. In this late winter season, the peach blossoms are full of branches, which is of course unreasonable. The young girl seemed to be aware of Zhong Kui's sight shyly and walked away slowly. When she raised the curtain, she looked back and smiled. Zhong Kui sighed, stood up, patted his palms and shouted to everyone in the courtyard, "Hey you guys, since you have gone back to the house, you should just go ahead. Anyway, you didn't make a profit, so you went straight out of the city and went back to each house." The dozens of people in the courtyard looked up at the attic not far away as if they were facing a big enemy. They only saw a weak scholar and a fat guy with big ears followed. The burly man sitting on the chair turned his head to look at Zhong Kui and sneered, "Is it a man or a ghost?" One of the trainers shook the bell vigorously, and then raised the bronze mirror high, shining the rays of sunset light to the two uninvited guests. The ancient mirror light dangled on Zhong Kui's face. Zhong Kui turned his head slightly, waved his hand and smiled. "It's okay, I just kindly remind you that there are ghosts in the city. I have been watching you long ago and waiting for the opportunity." The fat man rolled his eyes. The monk whispered, "It's not a monster or a ghost." The woman looked at the elegant man in blue shirt. She bit her lip. Here she was a poor scholar again. The man who lost the painted gourd looked at the fat man lying on the side of the beauty and laughed. "It's up to the new year. Dare to run out of the pigsty and wander around? Are you worried that our group of brothers will not eat well in the city? Young people shouldn't be so temperamental. Talking is weird." Eugene stood up and withdrew his gaze from the woman. "There are brothers in the 4 seas, and they are all brothers in the 4 seas. They are all brothers in the 4 seas, and they are friends if they are destined to touch them. Why do words hurt others?" Zhong Kui glanced at the fat man. How his temper became so good. "I have encountered similar things in the past. I am by my side and I dare not hurt others indiscriminately, but I will definitely get addicted to the mouth." It seems that his memory has increased on the side of Xindu Mountain. Zhong Kui finally stayed on the Guqiu, who was no different from ordinary people, and said in his heart, "Stop it. The girl in the small courtyard leaning against the peach tree is actually a ghost in the Golden Core realm, and this young man is the master of this ghost city. The young man looked up at Zhong Kuei and said in his heart, "They are all people. I heard that there is a saying in your mountain that it is difficult for gods to find dead people." Zhong Kuei shook his head and said, "It's not so simple to die. You can't sit still in the Qinghuang temple now and you can't turn the merit book. Don't be too confident." The young man stopped speaking. After hesitating, he nodded and said, "Then take them out of the city." Zhong Kuei asked with a smile, "I haven't asked my identity first and then test the level of realm?" The young man shook his head and said, "No, Mr. is a righteous man, don't offend." The fat man was surprised and said, "It's a shame to be able to chat like this. It's a pity to be a ghost." Then the fat man burned his and jumped up. "Oh hey, why did the Lord Qin come here? If you miss the distance you will meet the miss. What a ghostly city." Suddenly the heavens and the earth are clear and immortal. It turned out to be the master of Qinshan come here. Between words he had a little tiptoe. More than 200 caddies of meat floated off the ground, supported on the railing with one hand, dexterously jumped out of the women's attic. A huge body landed silently on the courtyard steps. It turned out that there was a blue shirt and long gown standing on the back of the man with a knife, looking down at the Nanmu couplet that had been crushed, and then scanning the broken tiles under the steps, regretting endless. "Are you so burdened? How much energy does it cost to build a few more wheelbarrows?" Qin Pingon raised his head and smiled and explained to Zhong Kuei, "Just passing by, I saw you here so I rushed over to take a look." Zhong Kuei complained, "Have you been in retreat like this?" The fat man immediately became unhappy, turning his head and staring at Zhong Kuei. "Presumptuous! Why are you talking to my brother Qin?" Zhong Kuei angrily smiled and said, "What an uncle." The fat man said awe-inspiringly, "I want help my brother or else I would turn my elbow to you, an outsider." Qin Pingon patted the fat man on the shoulder and reminded, "It's too late to pass. Heat, pay attention to heat." The fat man said humbly, "Qin Shanju is worthy of being an old world, and his casual words are all hard-earned experiences. A group of people in the courtyard are like falling clouds. Especially the burly armored warrior sitting on the chair with the big horse golden sword, motionless, with a great master demeanor. Because the mysterious man in the blue shirt behind him gently pressed one hand against the back of the chair, it wasn't that the sixth realm warrior didn't dare to move." Qin Pingon glanced at the Guqiu. He had previously overlooked the ghost town in the sea of clouds and noticed that something was wrong with this young man, except that Zhong Kuei was present, so he didn't need to worry about anything. Looking up at Zhong Kuei, Qin Pingon smiled and said, "I am so embarrassed to say that Eugene is an uncle, so I have to ask you to ask me for help?" Zhong Kuei rubbed his chin and said, "Don't worry, let me choose a day after Lichuan." Qin Pingon said, "Then I will continue on my way." Zhong Kuei waved his hand. A green shirt disappeared out of thin air. The color boat flies across. One fell down in the river while the ferry shrank to the size of a awning boat. It turned out to be a place of victory. The two mountains and the river, the cliffs are as sharp as knives and the chisel marks are faintly visible. In the canyon, the light suddenly dimmed as if entering a ghost gate. Another black boulder abruptly rises in the middle of the river, like an ancient mountain spirit waiting in black armor, stopping here, splitting the river water with a mammoth body and splitting it into two. Therefore he was regarded by the local boatman Josie for fear of the road. Xue Huai said with a smile, "When the water is low in autumn and winter it is still slightly better, but if the water is in full season in summer, the water will be turbulent and the boat will be as fast as an arrow. It is easy to hit the rocks with the pebbles and the boat will be destroyed or killed." And the ships on board collided head-on, especially the floods and the turbulent river water. "Go straight to this big rock in the heart of the river. You can hang the rainbow and the boat with noble experience will not dare to sail." Xue Huai likes to travel to famous mountains and rivers. He had been here before and he deliberately picked a bright moon night when floods broke out. The old master stepped on a flat boat with his feet and was mistaken for immortals by the local people. Yi Yunyun asked, "With this huge rock standing over the river, it is a major obstacle to water transportation. The local court didn't have the emperor to seal the water he bow, and built temples nearby to help press the water and smooth the water veins?" Xue Huai shook his head and said, "Don't say it. Since ancient times there has been no imperial court-approved water temple, and even the local natives did not dare to build an unruly temple. They said that this was a fight between the mountain and the water god, and the temple was built whether it was one or two. It seems that it is not appropriate to worship the gods of mountains and waters, but local county officials, when they took office, must come here together with official documents to sacrifice water for protection. Yi Yunyun wondered, why do you look a bit like that historical Yanling Dui? Shui Huai admired, it's still the master's knowledge and strong knowledge. If it weren't for the master's mention I would really not lean towards Yanling Dui. Howren had 4 major mainstays in the past years and Yanling Dui was one of them. In addition there was also a place in Baidi City in the divine continent of the Middle Earth, where the word, Dragon Gate, was inscribed in a red lacquered book. Yi Yunyun said, if you are in the Pushun area you can excavate a place to stand on the north side of Dashi for Wufu to stand on, and then wait for the floods and waters. You can pass fists here, beat your muscles and bones. Shui Huai asked tentatively, should I talk to the local court? Spend money to buy. My master, who is in an abnormal yellow attire, does not put on cosmetics, never likes gorgeous clothes and spends money which is very different from ordinary women. Yi Yunyun turned her head and looked at the old woman. Mrs. Chiu, is there any weirdness in the water? The old woman smiled and shook her head and said, actually there is no water descendant that is weird. It seems that at the root of the river bottom, a master nailed to death with a few iron chains, probably because he could not take it away, and he was unwilling to benefit from other immortal masters. However, this boulder is not of high rank and cannot be refined. What a good thing, just because of the special material, extremely heavy general spells and weapons. It is difficult to dig and quarry, and it is easy to unwind with the sharp edge, and it is cast. The weapons that came were of average value and not cost-effective. In the history of the old Yu dynasty, there was indeed the Qin Tianjian geomancy master, who was ordered to have an investigation here, and the result was similar to what Mother Chiu said. The most famous weapons of the gods on the rivers and lakes are mostly cast and refined from this kind of flying rocks outside the sky. There is a difference between 100 refining and 1,000 refining. Like the Town National Treasure knife of the Daquan dynasty, that's it, only the material itself is much higher. So the only use is to pull it out of the roots and move it away, using it as a whole piece of feng shui stone. It is only a gas trainer of the immortal family. It's hard to move this hill. Here the Yu family calendar, the emperors of the generation are considered simple and unwilling to relocate and move them to the capital. A slender figure landed on the top of a cliff. When the young woman saw Huang Yiyun and his group from a distance, she had a little accident, and she immediately landed on the shore with wind and moved gently, just in line with the colorful boat. Pei Qian estimated the time, and Yi Yunyun should also cross the ink line. Before going to sea, the younger brother Cui Dongshan asked her to come here to wait for the guests. Doesn't matter if you can't wait. She said that she has fallen in love with a piece of river stone. If the master sister doesn't mind, you can move to the Xindu mountain boundary for resettlement, and the price has been negotiated with the people in charge of this land boundary. At the ferry crossing, Pei Qian failed to meet Huang Yiyun and never expected to meet him here. After Pei Qian greeted him with a fist, he asked, is the Lord Yishan hit this huge rock in the heart of the river? Want to relocate back to Pushun? Yi Yunyun smiled and said, Xindu Mountain also fell in love with it? Pei Qian smiled. It's too far away from Pushun, I have no idea. Yi Yunyun said, how do you move? There is still a long way to go from Xindu Mountain. The threshold for moving the mountain to the peak is very high. Unless it is a mountain monster that is a member of the mountain or the monk's realm. To get high, you need to cut off the roots of the mountain first, and you must also be familiar with the talisman and the formation. Traveling thousands of miles, moving away from mountains, the burden is extremely heavy and accidents are prone to occur in the middle. If he was just migrating the boulders in the water, Chiu on the boat would still have some tricks, but after landing it would be very tricky. Even if the real body of the old Chiu appeared, it was actually not easy. Pei Qian's answer was extremely concise, just 2 words, carry away. Yi Yunyun smiled and nodded. You are busy, we will go to Xindu Mountain after we go shopping for a while. Pei Qian stopped on the shore. A colorful boat went downstream like an arrow. It's just that Yi Yunyun and her group turned around and looked around. I saw that Pei Qian leaped into the river, and after a few blinks the river was shaking, and there was the sound of muffled thunder and shaking at the bottom of the water. After a while the woman squeezed several iron chains. She dug a big hole at the bottom of the river bed, held the whole river rock with both hands, lifted it up and threw a small mountain into the air and then punched it out. Raising the falling boulder up 100 feet tall, a woman as small as a mustard seed came to the side of the hill, hovered in the wind, rounded her arms and hit it with a punch, hitting the stone in the sea of clouds. Rolling forward again for more than 100 feet, the figure is as fast as thunder, dashing forward. A brain the bag was slanted and the shoulder raised the hill 10 feet high. The woman came back to the back again and gave out another palm. In this way people took the rocks and went to Xindu Mountain together. The old woman swallowed. The little girl's family, where is such a strong force? Isn't he a martial artist at the top of the mountain? Will the qualifications be too exaggerated? Yi Yunyun smiled and asked, Xue Huai, do you want to challenge her? Pure Takeo, all of the same generation in the same realm. So Xue Huai and Pei Qian, as the direct disciples of Yi Yunyun and Qin Pingon, respectively, took the lead in asking fists before master, and it was normal. What's more, Xue Huai's trip was to a large extent just rushing to ask Pei Qian for his punches, trying to determine whether he could carry 20 punches. Xue Huai smiled bitterly. It seems that I am asking for hardship no matter how you look at it. The layman looks at the excitement and the expert looks at the doorway. Pei Qian moved the mountain in this way. In addition to the extremely heavy punching force, he also has to use cleverness in his boxing. Yi Yunyun held back a smile. Support 20 punches? Xue Huai took a deep breath. Fight for at least 10 punches. On the way Pei Qian moved to the mountain, a blue shirt appeared in the sea of clouds. Pei Qian just turned his head and wanted to speak. Qin Pingon scowled and said, You can't fall in a bit of pure anger. Pei Qian grinned, nodded and continued to punch. Of course not. Qin Pingon is just saying that. In fact, what he really wants to say in his heart is to make Pei Qian lazy and change a few more mouthfuls of pure innocence. It's okay. Sure. Fatherly. It's like two identities are fighting. I feel that Pei Qian can do one thing in one go with the beginning and the end, which is very good. But I also hope in my heart that the grown-up disciple will occasionally learn Xiao Haitan's stealing and skidding back then. What does it matter? A child has worked hard when he was young, isn't it just to be less hard when he grows up? The taste here is so complicated that it is not for outsiders. Accompanying Pei Qian through the sea of clouds for more than 100 miles, Qin Pingon finally stopped and said, Master still has something to do. I will pay attention along the way. Pei Qian blurted out, Master, don't worry, you won't bump into the mountains and rivers along the way. If you meet some high mountains, if there is that city temple under your feet, you will detour early. Qin Pingon was speechless. Was it because I was too strict before? Yes, it is. Pei Qian walked away and after handing out another punch he turned his head and looked around. The master was still standing there. After seeing her turning his head, he smiled and waved away. Ink line crossing. The rain is torrential like Long June splashing ink. It is also like the little black charcoal girl back then holding a brush to trace the calligraphy. Until the end there is no text, only ink. There was a blue shirt with a hat on his head and a drape. The man walked in a hurry, stopped outside a shop and took off the hat. The youth shopkeeper inside was rubbing a white jade carved fish-like dragon handle. The guest shook his hat at the door and asked with a smile, Can I borrow a treasure to avoid the rain? The young man nodded, Whatever you want. Glancing at the man in the clothes, the other party pretended to look at the clearly priced Kit Kat items in the shop. After a while, the young man was really too lazy to go around in circles. Did he see me toast and not drink, so he asked me to drink fine wine? From this it can be seen that the Pushun Yunkatang is also a man of fame and reputation, and as expected, there are not many good birds on these mountain monks. Zhou Xian, only the monk of Taiping Mountain, he would be willing to go there with just one sentence, and he would take whatever he gave him, giving him the title as he pleased. In addition, Yu Guizong, if a certain ancestor of the upper 5 realms in the ancestor hall came to Moxiandu to invite himself out of the mountain, he would be reluctant to be a guest clerk or something. Otherwise, Tong Yezhou is really not interested in other immortal palace sections. What kind of mountain monarch's Golden Summit Temple and mountain prime minister's Bailong Cave will not enter the deity's eyes at all, and he will not touch his eyelids? The guest asked with a smile. Why did the shopkeeper say this? The young man sneered. You immortal Pushun, since you like going around so much, why don't you just take a few more trips to Moxiandu? Why hide from the rain in my little shop? The customer smiled and said, "The shopkeeper misunderstood, I am not Brother Pushan." The young man was puzzled. "Just come to my shop to buy things?" Qin Pingon smiled and said, "Not all. I want to see the nascent soul realm monk with my own eyes and if feasible, try to invite him to serve as the protector of Taiping Mountain." At the gate of the Taiping Mountain, Yang Pu, a scholar of the academy, mentioned one thing: there was a young monk who claimed to be from Moxiandu whose surname was Negative Mountain and the name was Negative Mountain. The monk from the outside town only offered 3 sticks of incense at the gate of the mountain, and chatted with Yang Pu a few more and then left only to let Yang Pu encounter something. He could fly the sword to spread the letter of the Moxindu, and he could do his best. Earlier in Mixifeng, Qin Pingon had read a piece of espionage. It was Cui Dongshan's own efforts to trace all the mountain spirits and water monsters around Xindu Mountain. The battle is recorded in the book. In addition to Moxiandu, there is also the Old Yu dynasty. All the ghost towns in the territory Cui Dongshan walked all the way. Moreover, according to Cui Dongshan's arrangement, it is very likely that the junior brother Chao Qingqing will change his status and re-enter the imperial examination. In the Xinyu dynasty that will soon be unified, he will first get a 3 yuan in a company, and then Chao Sunny will be an official in the temple. The step-by-step career promotion, in the words of Cui Dongshan, is, "No matter how, you have to make your husband happy." Yu Jishan lazily said, "If you have something to say, let go of the fart. When the rain stops, I'm going to drive guests." Qin Pingon opened the door straight to the point. "Do you want to go to Taiping Mountain to practice? Which green onion are you?" Yu Jishan couldn't help but smile, stretched out his thumb and pointed at himself. "I am a person who speaks violently, don't mind, don't listen if you like. Bragging and not drafting drafts, a little Dragon Gate monk, dare to lie about his path to the cultivation of the nascent soul realm? Besides, your kid has a half-bronze relationship with Tapingshan, so what qualifications do you have to point your finger at it?" Qin Pingon smiled and said, "Presumably fellow Taoist has already known about it. Huang Ting has returned to Tongyi's Hao from Wuxia world, and is now a guest at Xianxia. I believe she will go to Taiping Mountain and rebuild the sect soon." Yu Negative Shan frowned and said, "Is there anything? It's another person who doesn't read the Shanshui Di report." Qin Pingon nodded and said, "There is indeed such a thing." Yu Jishan asked, "What is the picture for making wedding clothes for others?" Qin Pingon smiled and said, "Distant relatives are not as good as neighbors." Yu Jishan thought for a while, his eyes were weird, and he asked, "Are you Taoists?" Qin Pingon shook his head and said, "It's just a friend." Yu Jishan let out a cry and suddenly said, "Is that the future Taoist couple?" This skilled veteran Yuan Yingshui said, "Does this count as taking advantage of the fire, taking advantage of people's danger, taking advantage of the void?" Then the shopkeeper added a more ruthless sentence. "If I didn't guess wrong, you are a half-hearted scholar who failed to enter the academy, right?" Qin Pingon smiled silently. This kind of thing, the more you explain, the more misunderstanding it becomes. Dao friends are so good at chatting, it's no wonder that they can't live to the Yupu realm. It took 3,000 years to get a nascent soul realm from the Longmen realm. Previously, it was fortunate that Huang Yun had a big measure and didn't care about that joke. Otherwise, only relying on his nascent soul realm cultivation base, he could not walk Zhanghua Jiao. So if you want to say that the physical toughness is limited by the innate threshold of the road roots and feet, you can only say that it is really average, very average, if Yi Yunyun had been temperamental before. Almost this negative mountain fish and must not drown directly in the river. Yu Jishan asked, "Are you really friends with Huang Ting?" "That's right, how can a monk in the Dragon Gate realm be worthy of my family's Huang Ting?" Qin Pingon nodded and said, "I was lucky enough to meet the Taiping Mountain Laotian when I traveled to Tongyi's Hao in his early years." Yu Jishan groaned in silence, considered for a long time and said, "If Huang Ting can be asked to come here to find me, I will believe you. I will talk to Huang Ting for any plans afterwards." Qin Pingon smiled and said, "The Taoist Negative Mountain is old and prudent, so it should be." As soon as Yu Jishan was about to ask the other party's name and teacher, he saw the other party picking up the ink stone from the ancient bricks of the founding year of the Yu family, turning his head and smiling and asked, "Can you get a 50% discount?" Yu Jishan smiled and asked, "What do you think? 50% off? Why don't you grab it?" Never thought that Yin Yike would start to pay. A colorful boat was approaching the destination, and Yi Yunyun could clearly see the Xindu mountain from the old mountain. She suddenly rubbed her brows. Apart from Tan Rong, she actually had a more difficult job. Before she left, she went to the water house of the East China Sea woman again. As a result, she walked out of a lot of trouble. The goddess of water, who suddenly became a nymphomaniac, began to sneer, and she had to let Yi Yunyun bring a collection of woodblock color watermarked poems. The characters were dusty, the water was quiet, the colors were complicated, and the printing was extremely beautiful. Poor worker Jian. I said I saw the hermit. Be sure to ask the other party to help yourself and ask for a signature with Fengxue Temple Greatsword Immortal Wei Jin. Don't worry about it. Even if it's delayed for 10 years, it doesn't matter if you get a piece of paper. It was a thank you gift from her and the hermit. The old woman asked in a heartfelt voice, Master Yi Shan, isn't the location of Xianxian's sect selection a bit sloppy? Looking around, no matter what the old woman thinks, it's a barren land that is not suitable for pioneering the mountain. It's not really a place of beauty. Mountain luck is average, water transportation is thin, and the aura of heaven and earth is only slightly better than the so-called places of nowhere. Yi Yunyun smiled and said, back then Pushun, even if it weren't a poor mountain and bad river, was still in the same situation as here. We managed it bit by bit. Seeing Huang Yiyun didn't want to say more, the old woman stopped asking questions. It is estimated that the peaks of the golden cores of some sects will not lose the weather here. Unless the other party has already moved to the mountains, dragging the river out of nothing, and has already used some kind of blindness right now. The hostess on Xindu Mountain was Pei Qian and the scholar named Chao Sunny. In fact, they had seen each other in the tea shed in his hometown before. The old woman has a good impression of Chao Sunny. But I couldn't see Xianxia in that Master Cui. In Mixifeng Mountain the hospitality was simple, but Yi Yunyun and the others didn't care about it. Xue Huai tentatively asked Pei Qian on the way to climb the mountain, could both parties find an opportunity to ask for a fight? Pei Qian said with a smile to ask the master. As long as the master nodded, there is no problem. After the old woman settled in the house of vinegar and vinegar, she went to find Yi Yunyun, said hello, and said that she wanted to travel around the surrounding land. Of course Yi Yunyun has no objection. After the old woman left Mishue Peak, she hid her figure and used her life water method to swim away quietly. Coming to a place where the land and the sea meet, who can imagine that this place is always arid even though it faces the sea, and it is the hiding place of the Dadu Dragon Palace. With a secret treasure. After opening the prohibition, visit the old site of the Dadu Dragon Palace. The old woman saw things and hurt people. Everywhere Qionglu Yiyu lifeless, especially the palace of the princess, how lively in the past, crowded with friends, coveted and guests. In the middle there are countless daffodils, mountain monarchs like clouds, and the old woman standing at the door, inevitably sad and weeping secretly. In ancient times the dragons of the four seas were responsible for water transportation in the world, and the dragon in the sea, holding the secret bottle of the dragon palace, went to the land to spread the clouds and rain, and a drop of water in the sky, a foot of rain on the ground. On those Shilong stones entrenched and rested. All going forward. Qiudu did not immediately search for the rare and exotic treasures, searched many treasures and put them into the bag, but wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, and went to the hall of Dadu Longjun. The old woman sighed faintly outside the threshold. The old woman suddenly raised her head and saw a young woman wearing a snow-white robe sitting on the steps at the foot of the dragon chair. The old woman thought she was dazzled or some mirage illusion, but the next moment, it was confirmed that the other party was indeed a real person. The old woman suddenly had a sharp voice and angrily said, "Who dares to break into the forbidden area of the Dragon Palace?" Only the next moment the old woman felt sad. The woman twitched the corners of her mouth. "Isn't I supposed to ask you this sentence?" She was condescending, her expression arrogant, her snow-white eyes were full of disdain, and she could vaguely see the golden light flowing, like countless golden dragons swimming in the abyss of two ancient wells. An old Qiu from the Yuanying realm had a very loud voice and full of air, which made her think of the long-tongued women by the well in the small town in the past for no reason. The old woman frowned and said, "The old man is an old man in this place, the girl?" In ancient times, the dragon palace in the world was respected by the dragon palace of the four seas. In addition, there were 18 Dadu dragon palaces. Many of the rivers and lakes on the land were suffixed with the word long, such as the length of Qiantang and the length of West Lake. The ranks are strict and cannot be overridden. The ranks are distinct. Only talking about the dragon pillar is very particular. They are carved with 5 claws for claws and 3 claws. In addition, the color of the dragon pillars has a clear etiquette system. Separate golden color, purple, green, black, etc. Like the beam pillar dragon in this hall, it has 4 claws and blue, which means that the lord of the dragon palace here, although he is in a high position, has an improper background, is not the orthodox of the dragon monarchs of the 4 seas in the past. Descendants. The young woman yawned and joked. You said that you are an old person, so what do you come here for, stealing things? Old Xiaodu blushed, a little guilty. The weird woman who was unidentified but was able to enter the Dadulong palace did not take any action, so as to monopolize all the old treasures, and did not seem to have any interest in chatting with the old woman. Although she failed to serve as the co-master of land and water transport, or even one of the 4 sea kings, the Zhongtu Confucian temple promised that the relics and old sites of the dragon palace in the world have been excavated before and occupied by various immortal forces. She is not allowed to turn the old account. I asked for it. At the same time, all dragon palaces that have not yet lifted the ban and are still in a dusty state, regardless of scale or specification, all belong to her. For example here. In fact, she had been here once before, but she didn't move anything. She was just used as a Xielong stone to escape the summer heat. Escorting Howren's troops to the wild world, the water walking the dart is not too easy. This time she is a break in official business, come here to take a breath. Seeing the young woman, Xiaodu suddenly sniffed and looked at herself again. Finally, she lifted her cheek with one hand and smiled with a soft look. In the hands of some so-called strange people she has eaten suffering? Let's talk about it. What kind of taboos did you commit back then? Taboo. The old woman was silent. She didn't want to reveal her own shortcomings, not to mention that she didn't dare to arrange behind the Dragon Tiger Mountain Heavenly Master. The woman chuckled and laughed. It's just a talisman from the Dragon and Tiger Mountain Taoist priest, and crushed the backbone of a 5,000-year-old Qiu? The bones are so soft, it's no wonder that they would go back to the owner's house and steal it, where they intended to give the Dragon Palace treasures a high man on the mountain. Let me listen, or let me guess. As soon as she raised her eyebrows, she seemed to become interested suddenly. Is it Wei Dejiangxian from Yuguazong in the south? Or is it Du Jinren from Jindingguan in the north? Seeing that the other party's tone was louder than the sky, the old woman became more embarrassed, and wanted to find a reason, first withdraw from the old Dragon Palace site before making long-term plans. The woman squinted her eyes and said, Do you like to pretend to be deaf so much? With a white palm like jade, gently tapping the steps, ripples and circles of green and faint essence water transported in the hall. The old woman seemed to have been hit by a sky thunder, hitting her heart, suddenly bleeding from her 7 orifices. She stretched out her hand to cover her ears, her throat moved slightly, but she could only make a babble. The woman who made her aggressive shots smiled and said, Isn't that what you wished? The young woman put her hands away, shook her sleeves, patted her knees gently and sneered, The descendants of the world's dragons have survived 3,000 years of cold and heat. Finally, all the hardships come and the dragon gate fight's over so that I can do that fish-to-dragon transformation. I really want to be on the top of the dragon gate, and you ask one by one over the past 3,000 years, how hard it has been and how difficult it has been. I think Qing Shanchong from Dafu Academy and the old Jiao from Fengshui Cave, I think they will all enjoy the blessings, so why are they boiled? What's going on? Seeing the old woman crawling on the ground, whimpering in dry howling. The woman was angrily noisy. The old woman was forced to show her true body, entrenched in the hall, dying with a 700 zhong body, as if carrying the weight of 5 mountains. The woman stood up, walked down the steps, raised her foot and stepped on the forehead of old Qiu's huge head, with a playful expression. Are you stealing something? Old Qiu finally realized it, and a strange brilliance burst into his eyes. It's you? The young woman sneered. The old faint-eyed thing finally recognizes me? Lao Qiu was extremely excited, enduring the severe pain. Tears were shining in a pair of eyes as big as a lantern, and the words unique to the ancient dragon said in a hoarse voice, The old maid is fortunate to see the real dragon. Fortunately, no regrets, though he died. GK showed no sympathy and increased the strength on his feet, then die. The old Qiu under her feet really didn't have any regrets, neither prayed for mercy, nor did he have the slightest unwillingness in his eyes. The big old Chio's head squeezed out a smile instead. Jigui squinted his eyes and said, "As soon as the restrictions are lifted, he rushes to steal things, right? Tell me, who is going to ask for credit and beg for mercy in exchange for a future?" Old Chio answered truthfully, not daring to hide it. Jigui asked, "Cui Dongshan? Xiandushan? How far is it from here?" On the threshold of the main hall, someone helped replied, "It's not too far." Jikyu raised his head and looked at the guy at the door. She looked complacent, but her heart was slightly shaken. How could she be so close that she couldn't notice the other person's breath? "By the way, it's the girlie who likes rouge gouache in my hometown. This guy made this guy so watery. Oh, it's really lingering now, it's not half a neighbor again." The man always stood outside the door and said, "It's almost enough." Jigui hesitated for a moment, and put away the foot that was trampling on the forehead of the old Chio and said with a smile, "Who am I, such a powerful official?" After the old Chio lost the mighty avenue suppressed, he immediately regained his human form, staggered, and turned his head to look outside the door. It was actually that Xianxia. The next conversation left the old woman both frightened and confused. "So like to be nosy? That also has to be nosy to manage. You didn't do this before. You are the same." Then inside and outside the door, the neighbors of the past were silent in pairs. But the old woman noticed a murderous intent as thick as water in an instant. Sword of Coming Chapter 900. Tongji's Hao Dadulong Palace ruins. Women in white clothes in the hall, green shirts outside the door. The two neighbors meet again in a foreign land, but there is not the slightest harmony in the atmosphere of meeting old friends in another country. In the Beiping Ziluapa mountain, the main peak is the Lingfeng bamboo tower, the wall on the first floor, the long sword is in the sheath, and the sword air is like a dragon and snake flying on the wall. Suddenly the sword light flashed, and the unsheathed long sword left Luapa mountain in an instant. The sword aura was like a rainbow and suddenly swept out of the Beiwei area of Dei. Mountain monarch Weibo didn't even have time to help hide his sword light. Fortunately, the long sword pierced the air very fast, and the cultivator in the world gave him a glimpse at most, and there was no trace. Standing on the top of Piyun Mountain, Weibo was inevitably worried, so he walked around Luapa Mountain and found Zhou Lian. Zhou Lian just smiled and gave a simple answer. "If it's okay, it will pass." Weibo feels a little relieved. Indeed, even in a foreign country, Qin Pingon has both Cui Dongshan and Mr. Xiaoma beside him. In the main hall of the Dadu Dragon Palace, Qiudu was unable to see the true realm of the sword fairy in the Qingshan sword when he was in the tea shed by the Jilin River last time. The old woman just felt that a sword repairman, since he dared to confront a real dragon, and there is no wind on the momentum no matter how it should be a fairyland sword repair, it is even very likely to be ascended. Otherwise, in the former site of the Dragon Palace near the sea, let you be Wei Ying, the great sword immortal of Yu Guizhong, against this woman named Wang Zhu. As long as you don't change the battlefield, there is no suspense about the outcome. Shigue smiled and asked, "My wife, I really want to fight with this sword fairy. Who are you going to help?" The old woman did not hesitate to say, "The old man is willing to be sent by the real dragon, and he will go through water and fire. Vinegar and vinegar. If you can follow this true dragon to practice, the road is promising and the future is limitless. My own little Nizi, who has excellent cultivating aptitude, if he can practice the water law to the extreme in the future, not to say that it is to establish a school or to go to the top of the Hauran mountain, it is not impossible. Like the real fire dragon on the top of the earth, the fire method is recognized as the #1 in the world, and it is possible to suppress Madame Tundan, who is also in the Ascension realm, from beginning to end as a tortoise in the Lushui pit." Qin Pingon laughed blithely. One dared to ask and the other dared to answer. "You are living here." But the old woman didn't have any murderous intentions. Being detained by the Dragon Tiger Mountain Celestial Master for too many years with a talisman, this old man now has neither the ambition to establish a school nor the desire to prove longevity. Everything is done for the little girl. All beings with spirits have their own instincts. Among them, the genus of Jiaolong, many characteristics are especially obvious. Jigui stood at the bottom of the steps and glanced at the old man. This wife and aunt, like those long-tongued women who carry water in her hometown, she is stern and stubborn, and the wall is just like the wind. So it's more cordial to watch. Jigui suddenly turned his head and looked at one place, Dao's heart trembled slightly. She shifted her gaze again, her eyes cold, looking at Qin Pingon outside the main hall. She used to be more murderous, then now she is more murderous than murderous. Resentment was in her heart, like wild grass spreading wildly. There was no reason to speak. It's like saying, even you have to kill me? Outside the door, Qin Pingon turned a blind eye to this. Zigui's face was green. She sneered, turned her back to the door and slowly walked up the steps to the dragon chair. She turned around and reached out to hold the handle of the chair. Since the former site of the dragon palace was in a half-open state, even Qiudu had noticed the majestic aura outside the door, and the old woman was panicked for a while and lost her color. Remember that back then in the ancient times when the dragon's palms went to the land to spread rain according to the law, the old woman was still here as a teacher and maid, and Dada Dragon Palace encountered a storm, and a group of sword immortals joined forces to ask the sword and Dadu. It was just that shocking questioning sword. Fortunately, under the efforts of Donghai Longjun personally appeared to mediate, the thunder and the rain were small, and the two sides did not cause any casualties. Qingshan, surnamed Qin. Gentle temperament, decisive shot. In the old days, there was such an unknown sword fairy with a sword in a blue shirt. He belonged to Hong Kong in the Howren world. No one knows the origin of this person. He only knew that before the Battle of Zhanlong, this person used to be located in the boundary of ancient Shu. In that cicada-shed cave in the sky, only one person and one sword and a group of sword repairmen. There was a sword lead. After that, the kendo luck of Ao Pingzhou was ruined. The old woman suddenly turned pale and said in a trembled voice, "Are you a dragon slayer?" Qin Pingon was silent. Jiaogui chuckled and said with a smile, "It's really like your usual style of doing things. Always be careful and careful again. Never pursue the maximization of profits. Only seek one without making mistakes. Ordinary people, rich and noble, do not return to their hometown like a night walk in genie. But the neighbor in front of him is suddenly rich and not surprised." She actually saw the clues before that sword aura approached Dadulong Palace. The so-called Qin Pingon in front of him was only a puppet talisman, and several ancient talismans that had been lost for a long time were used. It's like an array of blessings. The real body is outside the Dragon Palace. It's no wonder that lifelessness, with this covering the secrets, hiding the sky and crossing the sea, coupled with his avenue water and the fate of the flying sword, can isolate the small world, and finally let the substitute, the gods, sneak into this place unconsciously. Sure enough, there is another blue shirt floating with a sword. Tu Qin Pingon appeared at the same time. The latter stretched out his two fingers, and the former dissipated and turned into a pocket flying sword, which was illusory like a spring breeze. Qin Pingon put that Jing Zhongyue into his sleeve, and while a grain of mustard seeds returned to his true body, Qin Pingon also quietly erased the overlapping rune formations on the flying sword. Qin Pingan's magical power of the talisman originated from a certain idea of his friend Lu Jinglong. As the youngest master in the history of Taihui sword sect, Lu Jinglong is both a sword repairer and a battle master. Zigui's face was gloomy. Why break the contract without authorization? Qin Pingon is too lazy to answer this kind of question. You haven't asked me about the contract, but I will ask you if I resolve the contract? Juvenile was very angry but quickly smiled because he remembered many old things. The mud legs and mud bottle alley are indeed the same virtues, but they are not unfamiliar. At that time Song Jisun was so angry that Qin Pingon was so angry. Two people of the same age separated by a wall. Often when Song Jisun had nothing to do, they took Qin Pingon to relieve their sorrow, provocation, sarcasm and a basket of acrimoniousness. Throw away his words. On the other side of the yard there was almost no response. Instead Song Jisun felt aggrieved. There was no need for words to fight, just a kind of silence which made Song Jisun failed. Qin Pingon has at most one face and one eye or occasionally a fluttering sentence. Song Jisun was able to deflate so many times he almost jumped into thunder. He had to go over the wall and fight, clenched his fists with his hands, his veins violent, but he was helpless. When it comes to fighting, Song Jisun grew up and really didn't have the confidence to follow. Qin Pingon really wrestled his wrists. For example, Qin Pingon was annoyed by Song Jisun's remarks, so he just said casually, as an apprentice as a kiln worker, how much is a month's wages, and at the end of the year he can't afford spring festival couplets. A very simple sentence but with a lot of meaning. It will naturally make Song Jisun, who has been enlightened very early, think about it. It is easy for him to think more, and then the more he thinks, the more he feels being poked. For example, Qin Pingon is I'm not saying that although Yu Song Jisun is rich and has no worries about food and clothing, I make money by my own ability. Taking it one step further, it's like repeatedly suggesting that Song Jisun is the illegitimate son of the kiln superintendent, so you don't have to go to the grave on Qingming Festival. All your money has fallen from the sky. At that time Zhigui felt that this boring gourd neighbor was to be a good person. Otherwise, as long as he was willing to talk and scold the street, maybe the widow in Nipping Lane and the maid-in-law in Xinghua Lane, it might not be Chen. Peaceful opponent. Zhigui smiled and asked, "You are not the kind of person who has a good face. Now that you have fallen, why bother to be strong?" Qin Ping held a night tour, strode across the threshold, came to the hall, watched the dragon pillars up close and said casually, "Before in Dali capital, some of the monks of the earthly branch said that since the national teacher is no longer there, it is better to do something. Yes, I accidentally heard it and it didn't end well." GQ pouted. "Do you really consider yourself to be him? The person who can take care of her is no longer there." Qin Pingon seemed to completely ignore Zigui's ascension, and the two sides got closer and closer. GK suddenly sneered, "You even brought a helper?" Qin Pingon raised the long sword and gently wiped the blade with his left hand. The blade was clear like Chiohong, like a mirror. The sword holder looks at him like a clear stream of autumn water. Zhigui glanced at Qin Ping's sword-holding hand. She suddenly stretched out and yawned as if she suddenly became in a good mood. A needle in the heart of a woman. Chidu looks weird. How does it feel like a pair of enemies in a complicated relationship? Could it be that idiotic man complaining to women? There was a period of love-hate entanglement that was constantly cutting and arranging? GK asked in his heart. Now that I have the identity of Dong Haijun, will I be entangled by those sneaky dragon cultivators? Qin Pingon said in his heart. Of course, they just need to wait for you to make a mistake. GQ walked down the steps, smiled and asked, "What are you talking about?" Qin Pingon nodded, turned around and walked towards the main hall gate first. Zhigui twisted his robe with his fingers and trot quickly to keep up. Leave only a stunned old woman. After stepped out of the hall, GQ smiled and asked, "Did you make a special trip to find me?" Qin Pingon shook his head. "It's just a coincidence. The reason why I followed this trip was because I was worried that the old lady would go there without knowing it and be settled by you." This time, Chiodu revisited his old place and selected the old treasures of the Dragon Palace. No matter what the purpose is, once he is known by Zhigui, he will definitely not be able to eat. In addition to knowing the promise made by the Zhongtu Confucian Temple and Zhigui, Qin Pingon knew more about the temper of this neighbor back then, and he would definitely be taken revenge by Zhigui. Back then there were many trivialities in Jingfang in her hometown, and Zhigui would be careful. I remember all of them, not to mention this kind of thing that she completely took control of when Zhigui shot Chiodu. It would only be indifferent. In addition, the buried river in the Dequan dynasty was once a section of the main road in Jidu. Qin Pingon was also worried that the Bio Palace and the buried river Empress would be affected by this incident. The only accident was that Qin Pingon did not expect to meet her here. In the 60 years of his hometown in the early years, Mr. Qi was restricted by his identity and could not contact her too much. But Zhigui was able to regain his freedom. On that snowy night she climbed out of the iron lock well and staggered all the way to Mud Bottle Alley. How could it be Mr. Qi's oversight? Is of course a deliberate act. Because of this, Qin Pingon was in the Chidu temple and reminded Zhigui to be careful. Otherwise, Qin Pingon, no matter how good a teacher is unwilling to take care of Zhigui. After parting ways with her, the big deal for both parties is that you take your Yangguan Road and I take my single plank bridge. Qin Pingon asked in his heart. On the other side of Nipping Lane, our two houses are next to each other. Seems that no one lives all the time. As long as I can remember, I have been deserted. The households in Huaihuang County can't be found. Do you have any clues? Zhigui and Qin Pingon walked side by side. She turned her head and smiled. Are you asking me for help? Qin Pingon nodded and said, That's it. The two parties have neither relatives nor cause, nor grievances or grudges, and they are both fellow villagers and neighbors. Ask a few more gossips without hurting the bones. GQ smiled as if he didn't intend to speak. Holding her head high, she strolled in the courtyard of this dragon palace ruins. Y'all think that back then the mud legs around me on the road I met myself carrying water and returning to Mud Bottle Alley, and he would help to carry the bucket. In winter she would carry a big sack of charcoal because she didn't want to go there. At that time she was the poorest worm suppressed by the small town avenue. She always felt that the road was far away and looked extraordinarily heavy. Song Jisun and Lu Xianyang are such careful men, but they have never misunderstood anything about this matter. Neither side felt that Qin Pingon would be a little bit crooked. The woman folded her hands, interlaced her 10 fingers, looked forward and asked softly, "Do you think I am worthless except for the realm?" Qin Pingon thought for a while but did not rush to give an answer. It happened to be the gentleness of the man next to her, and her face suddenly became gloomy with anger, so it was better to just blurt out and nod in acknowledgement. Qin Pingon said slowly, "No. Yomo is thinking of some old stories from his hometown, and Qin Pingon has a softer expression. It was a silly straw-shoe boy who met Mr. Qi for the first time and begged for help." After Qin Pingon re-examined the time-traveling picture, only to find that the girl used to scold the locust tree in her hometown, made Qin Pingon feel very relieved. Qin Pingon put away his thoughts and asked, "How did you know those few?" The difference between a dragon cultivator and a dragon cultivator is a world of difference in their respective pursuits. Jigui was a little impatient, knowing halfway through but each taking what he needs anyway. In the future my Shuifu also needs something that can really do things. Qin Pingon did not restrict Jigui to what he should or should not do. Instead he just said casually, "What we have seen along the way is either good or bad." Jikyu wondered, "Aren't they good or bad?" Qin Pingon smiled, "This is the crux of the problem." Juvenile smiled and said, "Why don't you just become a teacher?" Never thought that a man nodded and said, "I have chosen a school." The Dragon Palace site is a private garden of Longzi in the past. It covers a very wide area. There is a lake and pond, lotus leaf fields in the water, and a grasshopper boat. There are 4 people in the boat, an old man, a beautiful woman, and a burly man. A young man. They are now the servants of the true Dragon King Zhu, and they can be regarded as taking refuge in her, the newly promoted king of the East Sea. The beautiful woman stood at one end of the small boat, dressed as a palace, combed the cloud bun, slanted away from the golden steps, lightly put on the powder, and the slender waist was hung with an ancient bronze mirror and a crystal wall. She turned her head to that person. The old man at the stern asked curiously, "Li Ba, do you think the master and the hermit Sama would fight if they didn't agree with each other?" The old man named Li Ba, with gray hair and clear bones, shook his head lightly and said, "If you have no grievances you can't fight." Beside the old man's feet, there was a burly man sitting cross-legged. In the end the young man must be in the mountains with successful cultivation. His skin is like jade and his appearance is as beautiful as a beauty. He is lying in the boat with one hand under the back of his head with his legs raised. His mind is relaxed, leisurely in one hand. Shaking the jug, the amber liquor fell straight into the mouth, shook the empty jug, sat up and glanced at the direction of the hall. "It's so heavy, sword spirit. It deserves to be a sword repairman in the Great Wall of Jianqi. People." The beautiful woman turned around and looked at the majestic man sitting like a rock. "Shimon, if you allow both of you to fight the enemy only as martial arts, can you fight with your bare hands? According to the list of 10 young people in the world, I heard that this young hermit was the martial artist of the 9 realms when he was alone at the head of the city, playing with Xianxia. The man is obviously also a master of martial arts, and he said straightforwardly, 'The other party told me not to hit me with a hand.' Pure Wufu looks at the world and often only takes Wufu in his eyes. This Hauran native monster named Shimon once carefully weighed the caddies, and he had no chance of winning against the old ape who moved to Xingyang Mountain. The latter was also naturally tough, so he Tan asked Qin Pingon. That's not called a discussion, it's called death in vain. The woman laughed and cursed. How old is he? How old are you now? Why don't you die? The man sneered and said, according to you, everyone except Chao Ci and Qin Pingon should stop learning martial arts and boxing. Zigui's 4 servants from the water mansion, 1 immortal, 2 jade pu, plus 1 martial artist at the top of the mountain. In addition to the human monks, there are also ghosts and demons, but they have all been recorded and checked on the Confucian temple. The young man sat up and remembered something. The King Xianxia wine in the liquor store on the Great Wall of Jianqi has spent a lot of money, and it has been a drag on the favor. It was hard to buy a pot and I would doubt my life after drinking it. Is it possible that the drinks at the Xianxia banquet were all fake wines? The burly man nodded and said, "It's really awful. I'm not afraid of drinking bad wine, but am afraid of drinking fake wine. I have to stand in front of the drugstore to drink." Between words, the man habitually reached out and took out his crotch. The woman glared and complained, "It's not nauseous. Can you fix this stinking problem?" The burly man's earnest voice said, "I can't change it." He also had a catchphrase that Gong Yen couldn't bear the most: "Don't look up, my brother, our brothers won't have that yen fu or that life." A group of people. The woman's name is Gong Yen and her nickname is O. She is a native monk in Fuyao, and she was once a female ancestor of an old sect. She is only homeless after a battle. Gong Yen was quite gloating at the situation of the mountain and water cave. Later she also met a female Xianxia with the surname Nalan, a foreigner whose realm is unknown, probably from the Yuan-Ing realm, and the other party claimed to be from the Palace of the Suspended Landscape. The two parties had done a few big deals. The outgoing Xianxia who was in charge of the affairs of the Abbot Xianshui cave at the time was a prodigal lady. She had a relationship with the Middle-earth Confucian temple. She even dared to openly behave as a seller. Those who came to Gongyan would not refuse. Just like going to the street to sweep the goods, the harvest is quite fruitful. The old man's name is Li Ba, his hometown is from Jinjiazu, and the Taoist name is Quenched. He was once a year-long friend of Jinjiazu Wanyan Laojing. He was devoted to the Tao and served as the national teacher of a great dynasty under the mountain. He only assisted 3 emperors successively. It is used, especially the last talented subjugated king, who actually played with the Qingzhang Taoist Academy where the national teacher Li was removed, intending to canonize himself as the leader of the Taoist emperor. When Howren's water walks the darts for the time being, the owner, Wang Zhu, promised them that they could choose good woods and dwell on them according to their wishes. For example, 2 of them decided to practice long-term practice in the water mansion, and the other 2 planned go to Aquarius Island to settle down with the capital, because they are quite optimistic about the feudal king Songmu. A snow-white figure, like a white cloud falling down the lotus pond, stepped on a green lotus leaf, swaying, finally stabilized, craned his neck and looked at the handsome man sitting in the middle of the grasshopper boat. Yelled, "Oh hey, this is not the one who used to be famous like Spone-lying Songyun, self-proclaimed Jiangdong alcoholic, self-proclaimed Mai Jitian Y Tian, threatened Toksep the heart, keep the heart fast, being a heart palace. It is rumored that a sigh of breath can catch the wind, rain, cloud and thunder, and then was almost killed by Zhang Tiaoxia because of the fight for fishing position Huang Man the Jade Taoist." The young man in white clothes akimbo his hips. "Let me take a breath, I'm exhausted." The uninvited guest stared at the 4 people in Zhouzhong for a moment. Then the white-clothed boy turned his head and looked at a waterside pavilion on the shore and smiled and asked, "In this place I am fortunate to meet so many outsiders. Mr. Xiaomo, tell me, what is this called?" In the water pavilion, a weak scholar with a yellow hat and blue shoes appeared at some point, holding a green bamboo stick, and replied with a smile, "Probably it can be regarded as a wild scene without going out, and I will meet the expert from the lane." The yellow mantle sitting over there never thought that he would be exposed to the bottom in one breath and smiled and asked, "Who are you?" He used a number of blinding methods and kept his name incognito for more than 100 years. Logically speaking, he should not be seen through his identity at a glance. 4 strange men and strangers in the boat. Only listen to the white-clothed young man's serious words. "I am Dongshan." Cui Dongshan shifted his gaze and looked at the old man, with a look of Chinese medicine smell and bitterness, and his face was astonished. "Oh? Isn't this Li Ba from Luxia's national teacher?" Yes, it must be by that. The extremely respected Wanyan Laojing broke his heart, and he no longer wants to stay in the sad place in his hometown. "Putting me off, I have to change a place to relax." Cui Dongshan suddenly took out something from his snow-white sleeves, and another golden rooster stood alone, holding the demon mirror in his hand, holding it high and aiming at the woman. "Hey! Where are the monsters and ghosts running? Don't you come back soon?" "It does not work." The young man in white frowned slightly, put the ancient mirror in his sleeve, and then took out a new one from the sleeve. One jumped, changed position and moved horizontally. It landed on the side of a green lotus leaf. Picking up the ancient mirror, after changing hands to catch it, he shouted, "Stop." Later, 2 ancient mirrors were taken out. The 4 most famous demon mirrors in Howren were all displayed by the white-clothed boy. 2 of them were made by the Dragon Tiger Mountain Heavenly Master's Mansion and Fu Lu Yuxian's sect. 2 sets are the regular mirrors collectively called Mountain Mirrors by Jin Jizhou, and the Water Mirrors of Delankyu. The latter 2 draws the refining sun essence and moon flower respectively. Each has its own strengths. The mountain mirror is powerful and the obstacles are broken quickly. The water mirror can find the traces of the spirits and ghosts, and there is no way to hide. The 4 people on the grasshopper boat looked at each other. Especially the targeted Gong Yen, who was even more dumbfounded. Is his party a sick mountain master? It was equivalent to the white-clothed boy who had turned around and returned to the place, and put away the demon mirror in angrily, misunderstanding, complaining that this sister is too beautiful. The old saying goes that if you meet in the mountains by chance, it is either a spooky ghost or a fox monster. Shimon looked at the old man and Li Ba nodded he could take action, grasp his measure and see if he could check it out and explore the depth of the other side's Taoism. The burly man's figure suddenly rose. The water level of the lotus pond around the boat dropped suddenly. The lake in the distance was surging. The waterway cascaded up and spread to the shore. Only the water pavilion where the yellow hat youth was located was not affected. The Shimon of the 9-realm warrior slapped an elbow on the forehead of the white-clothed boy, and the opponent had no strength to fight back, like an arrow leaning into the water. After a while, the white-clothed boy stuck his head in the distance and wiped his face. After the water was over, he reached out and grabbed a lotus branch that was swaying with the water and then grabbed a lotus leaf that fell towards him, flipped his figure, jumped onto the leaf and yelled, "Thief, dare to commit murder and injure others. This thing is endless. Wait, I will call someone. If you have the ability, don't run." Cui Dongshan stopped talking suddenly with a face of self-pity, stomping and saying, "I never thought that I would still be the person I hated the most. I acted like this, like molesting a good woman on the street and then being beaten on the ground by a hero. The dude who only dared to run after he got up and yelled at others while running." Shimon gathered the sound into a line and reminded the other 3, "I have ideas." The woman glanced at Huang Man and sneered, "Jade Taoist, can this be tolerated?" Huang Man smiled and said, "Be careful not to overturn the boat in the gutter, I can bear it again." Xiao Emo watched the farce from a distance without any intention of blending in. He is just the dead man of his own son, not to mention this sect Master Cui as the proud pupil of the sun, does not need Xiao Emo to worry about safety. Cui Dongshan looked at the plump beautiful woman, and recreated a regular mirror with the inscription, "Up to the mountain," from his sleeve. Ah? The old mirror hanging from the waist of this sister is so familiar. The villager sees the villager. 2 eyes full of tears? Gong Yen said helplessly, "This guy is so annoying." Xiao Emo leaned against the pavilion pillar and lifted the trekking stick in his hand. "I advise you not to move around. It is easy to kill you, but it is hard to get it covered with water." The white-clothed boy seemed to have found a backer with his hands on his hips and laughed. "Have you heard? Did you hear? I called Mr. Xiao Emo to say, I want you to be honest, behave, restrain yourself and be more polite to me." Xiao Emo does not deny that if this sect Master Cui is just a passerby who has just met, his words and deeds are indeed quite awkward. Among Xiaozhou, the Jade Taoist with the highest realm seemed to be unable to bear the absurd behavior of the white-clothed boy, so he planned to do it himself. In an instant, the young man in the yellow hat and blue shoes came to the grasshopper boat, standing on one side of the boat, and gently touching the Jade Taoist's eyebrows with a mountain stick. A green bamboo staff like a scion-long sword, with bleeding threads on the forehead of the Jade Taoist at the tip of the sword. "Fellow Taoist Huang Man, cultivation is not easy, so cherish your life." Xiao Emo smiled and said, "Walking around the world, I often stand by the river. There are no shoes without wet shoes. I only know how to fight and kill. It will not go long." The boy in white began to be a demon again. His hands clapped quickly, but there was no sound. As soon as Shimon was about to make a move, his whole body flew upside down, like being hit by hundreds of sword auras at the same time, stepping on the surface of the lotus pond, retreating again and again. Those invisible sword auras are very measured, as if just to make a martial artist of the 9 realms peeked out of the boat. A man and a woman appeared on the shore of the lotus pond. Xiao Emo put away the hiking stick, left the boat and then passed away in a flash and came to his son. When Cui Dongshan saw her husband, he immediately changed his mind, followed Xiao Mo to Qin Pingon, and introduced Huang Man and Li Ba to his heart. After Qin Pingon heard this, he fisted the 4 of the small boats, and then asked Cui Dongshan to call Qiu Du to leave the place together. Zhigui suddenly said in his own heart, Qin Pingon, you and the old Qiu said that I asked her to take away the treasures of the Yicheng Dragon Palace. This Dragon Palace will be closed after the first incense stick. If she has the courage to come here, if you have the courage to not listen to my instructions, you will let the old Qiu take the consequences at your own risk if you have the courage to steal things. Qin Pingon smiled and said, as expected to be Lord Donghai, such a great official authority. Qiu rolled his eyes. Qin Pingon took Cui Dongshan and Xiao Mo, and only waited for about half of the incense outside the gate of the Dragon Palace site, and Qiu Du panicked out of the gate. Returned to Xindu Mountain together with Yufeng. Cui Dongshan walked forward in the form of pouring water and said with a smile, Mr. Zhigui now knows how to recruit soldiers and buy horses. She is still very progressing. Nowadays in the vast world, in addition to the 5 mountains of the Middle Earth, including Sui Mountain, Jiui Mountain and Yanji Mountain, there are also 5 lakes and 4 seas. Now the gods of these mountains and rivers have the highest rank, and they are all the first grades on the Golden Jade genealogy formulated by the Confucian Temple. It's just that although the 5 lakes are equal to the 4 seas, the difference in the waters under the jurisdiction of the 2 sides is 1 world. Among the Hauran 9 continents, the largest Middle-earth god continent, the master of land and water transport, Mrs. Lushwiking Tundan. According to the boundaries of Sahajan, the East China Sea under the jurisdiction of Zhigui includes the vast waters outside Dongbeiping's Hao and southeast Tongyi's Hao. Therefore, Zhigui chose Tongyi's Hao, the Dragon Palace site, because she will focus on managing the water mansion in the future. In addition to pursuing the river Qinghaiyan within her jurisdiction, she also needs to foster the Tongye dynasty in addition to the Aquarius Dali dynasty. The powerful and prosperous new and old dynasties of the Yao dynasty in Daquan in the central part of the continent, the Yu dynasty in the north, and the Yuan dynasty in the Old Din, helped Zhigui grow and strengthen his dragon spirit. The new South Sea Lord will be in charge of Nan Pasua Chao and Fu Yao Chao in the southwest. Therefore, Qin Pingon wants to sow the mountains and rivers of the 3 continents, and he really needs to deal with him. In addition to Zhigui, his old neighbor, there is also Li Yeho, who previously served as the Shuijun of the Moon Lake. Because of the Shanshui Mansion report of the Shanhaizong, it is estimated that all mountain monks now know that Qin Pingon has obtained a savage river water transport. Maybe the new South Sea King will soon send an envoy secretly and take the initiative to visit the door. It is even possible that Li Yeho will take the time to visit Luapa Mountain in person. Cui Dongshan smiled and asked the old woman, is it embarrassing? The old woman smiles far-fetched. Is really embarrassing, I can't wait to dig a hole in it. According to a proverb on a mountain in Tongyi's Hao, it would be called, Jiang Shangzhen looks in the mirror, and he is not a person inside and outside. Where does she want to get this hidden Xianxia, not only the hermit of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, but also the real dragon who has been next-door neighbor for many years? Wang Zhu accompanied her all the way in the previous half of the incense, and even helped the old woman to select a few water law treasures, not to accept it? How dare Qiu do not accept it? Qin Pingon smiled and said with relief, old mothers don't need to feel awkward. There are some misunderstandings that belong to human nature. Let's just say don't have to worry about it. There are many things that are hard to let go of. Today's heart will not be laughed at in the coming year. The old woman was a little relieved. Master Qin Zhenxian has a lot of them. He used to be an old man with shallow eyelids and a gentleman's heart. Now he has a ridiculous and generous ending. It is the old man's own responsibility. Qiu Du has made up his mind and changed his original intention when he came. For the sake of jealousy, there is nothing to be shameless. Now that he knows the true identity of Qin Zhenxian next to him, what is the ambiguity? The old woman hit the railroad while it was still hot. Qin Zhenxian, this trip to visit Xindu Mountain with Lord Yishan is here on the journey of vinegar and vinegar. Even if Sect Master Cui doesn't invite him, the old man will walk with Yishan's face and dare not expect vinegar to become a vinegar. Qin Xianxian's direct disciple only asked for the vinegar and vinegar to have a name on the golden and jade genealogy of the Xindu Mountain Zhu Shirtang. What kind of guest? Xiao Jiao is angry. As for the Dong Haijun, who is still the only real dragon in the world, Wang Zhu, the old woman can be regarded as chewing some aftertaste. She and the Fengshan and Fadu around her are all outstanding Qingshan sword immortals, neighbors for many years, and there is a story between the two. Xiao Mo smiled, revealing the secret with his son. On Xiao Mo's side, the monks in the Ascended Realm, it is best not to worry about it. So Qin Pingon said straightforwardly, to be honest, even if the old mother dared to send the jealous girl to Xindu Mountain for practice, I wouldn't dare to accept it. Before, in the engagement shop on the river bank, the girls dared to lead herself to Huang Yiyun indiscriminately. She was not afraid of the sky and was not afraid of it, and her personality was too detached. Speaking harder, the little girl is a master who does things without regard to her head. Qiu Du glanced cautiously at Qingshan Jianxian. If there is no reason to think of something, the old woman feels a little guilty. Vinegar and vinegar, this little girl really likes to mess with mandarin ducks. Not only did they secretly lead the red line for Qin Pingon and Yi Yunyun before, in fact just this year they met two foreigners, an old scholar and a dull man who traveled the Jilin River. During the period they rested in the tea shed, vinegar. Almost got into trouble. Cui Dongshan whispered, "Sir, I dare to accept it." His own ancestor is called a hidden dragon and crouching tiger, with a wealth of talents, sword fairy like clouds and master like rain. But at the beginning of my creation I was in dire need of talents. That little girl, according to Xiao Mo's statement, was born in the ancient moon family. Although her blood relationship is weak, she has good cultivating aptitude, hopefully Yupu. It is hoped that Yupu, that is the nailed Yuaning Dixian, but don't ignore the Dixian as a god. In the Taiping years, the Dixian monk is often a signboard with the sect outside the mountain, and it is also a golden signboard. Just like Huang Yun's Pershen Yunkatang, Yi Yunyun really can handle things. It's not that people like Tan Rong and Xue Huai, who are the master of the law, are running around busying themselves. Furthermore, this old man is a little bit better. It protects shortcomings. Is it a natural fit with your own style? Qin Pingon squinted his eyes. Cui Dongshan immediately changed his words. Mr. is right. When the group returned to the Mishue peak of Xindu Mountain, Yi Yunyun immediately found Qin Pingon and asked if the two masters and apprentices could each ask a boxing. Sort of Coming Chapter 901. Xindu Mountain bans Xianfeng sweeps the flower platform. Pei Qian and Xue Huai, who are about to question the boxing, are 10 feet apart. Next to Qin Pingon, Cui Dongshan hugged the back of his head, ready to applaud the master sister at any time. Xiao Mo didn't come, so he went to Luobaotin and was busy. He was going to build a hut next to the Qingyi River and asked him about boxing. Special interest just said one sentence: the visitor is a guest, the son and the girl will punch lightly so as not to hurt their peace. Anyway, all the corners are flattering. Anything can be done? With arms around his chest, Qin Pingon leaned against the railing and said with a stern face, "Let's go back. How do you plan to explain to Eugene later?" They all called Xiao Mo to go out together. What else can he do? Cui Dongshan looked embarrassed. He didn't use his heartfelt words and whispered, "The big sister is still facing the husband. It's really unreliable at all. There is no accident at all." Very good, the elder sister didn't hear it at all. This means that Pei Qian really has no distractions. This kind of martial arts mentality is the so-called 10 directions. I am in the center and everything goes with the fist. Really achieved fist with me. Qin Pingon smiled and said, "This is how you wrong the money. It has nothing to do with her. If you don't believe it, wait until the questioning is over and ask her if she has leaked the news." Cui Dongshan immediately said, "Sir, please don't tell the master sister about this matter. I was on the Xin account book, and it was so easy to pay off." Qin Pingon said, "Indeed. I was very curious and immediately asked with my heart, 'Dongshan, you are the Xin account book? Tell me carefully who are before you.' Old cook Wei Haoyang, a few of them must be among the best. It is estimated that after leaving Uefudi, Zhong Kue, whom she had known very early, could not escape, plus our Wei Dashanjun, Shi Ro, Chen Lingjun. Only the character account book, without Qin Pingon guessing, must be his own master." Cui Dongshan shook his head vigorously like a rattle. Don't tell me if I'm killed. If the master sister knows about it, it's probably not about adding an account but a new account book." Qin Pingon nodded, not overwhelming. Suddenly, Cui Dongshan was full of energy. intending to make up for his work with her husband, turned sideways and acted like a thief. He took out a book from his sleeve, spit on his thumb and was about to turn the book and read the good news. Mr. Visiting Immortals at Sea, Students in Xiaomo. Qin Pingon immediately raised a hand. Stop, I don't know anything and I don't want to know anything. I will not get involved in your next specific affairs. Cui Dongshan stretched out his hand to cover his heart, his eyes were dull, his lips trembled and said, You. Mr. S. words are extremely harsh and it chills the hearts of the soldiers of the next sect. Qin Pingon turned a blind eye to hearing. Don't try to drag me into the water, my husband can't afford that person. Cui Dongshan suddenly said, some of the magic weapons of cultural and water transport are suitable to be picked separately and given to Nuanshu and millet grains as gifts. Anyway, the students have made up their minds. Even if Zhong Kue helps you to collect debts, the rest of the treasures are easy to talk about. The big deal will return to the original owner and I will treat myself as a free boomerang with Xiaomo. These are the only ones who will definitely be killed and won't admit it. If the trouble gets bigger, Zhong Kue will turn his elbow away and he will not hesitate to move out of Mr. to frighten people. Students are at most pained to compensate, but these 7 or 8 treasures, I really like it when I look at them, it's really hard to choose. Before Cui Dongshan finished speaking, Qin Ping slapped the head with a slap on the head, and then put the booklet in Cui Dongshan's hand into the sleeve of his blue shirt in a thunderous manner. Qin Pingon said heartily, Zhong Kue's side, I will deal with it. You would like to leave it to you. And Xiaomo, you two will go to deal with this senior together. Cui Dongshan suddenly made a fist, raised one high and it was done. Qin Pingon even added some words afterwards, kindly remind his student so as not to be adolescent, do things wrong and incomplete. Remember to see the thunderous senior Eugene next time. You and Xiaomo, if you want to be friendly and happy, and what is the point of spitting stars? You still have to calmly discuss with others. Don't bully others, don't bully customers. Business is not righteous. Green hills will not change the green water. What is your life? Everywhere does not meet, there will be a period later, in the future there will be more opportunities for you two to meet Senior Eugene, right? Cui Dongshan's little chicken pecked at rice, got it, got it. In the future I will often find Fat Gusu to play the autumn breeze. Qin Pingon began to change the subject. Do you think this questioning boxing can be ended? Cui Dongshan smiled and said, it depends on the sincerity of the master sister. Pushun Wufu Shui Huai, as Yi Yunyun's proud disciple, the old master's foundation in the far travel environment is quite good, and he is definitely not a man of bamboo strips. Qin Pingon gently twirled his toes and asked, I will ask Yi Shanju a fist later. This sweeping platform can withstand the fist and kick of the 2 boundless martial artists? Cui Dongshan smiled and said, even if it is broken it doesn't matter. The repairs will not take a few days. The students promise that they will be as new as they are when the beginning of the spring festival is celebrated. Qin Pingon was non-committal. Yi Yunyun, Qiu Du, Hu Chuling and the 3 Xiandushan guests stood together. The old woman asked in her heart, has Lord Yi Shan already known the identity of Qin Jianxian? Yi Yunyun smiled and nodded, I plan to give you a surprise. For the rest of his life, the old woman had a complicated expression and murmured, it is indeed a great surprise. At the old site of the Dragon Palace I was almost not scared to death by this Qin Jianxian teaming up with the true Dragon King Zhu. Fortunately it was a false alarm and more than expected, there was still an unexpected happy return. If it weren't for Qin Shan's meticulous actions and quietly following all the way, her trip to the Dragon Palace is doomed to have endless future troubles, and the gains outweigh the losses. Once Wang Zhu grasps the handle, it would not be so easy and comfortable to return the stolen goods. Just to say that the temper that Wang Zhu showed before Qin Pingon appeared was really not good. A little further away from Qin Pingon and them, at the moment Sui right side stood disciples Qing Chaolu and Jian Shuyu slanting back. Before asking the boxing, Cui Dongshan first found Sui right and said that he needed to borrow a land from her. Sui right side certainly has no reason to refuse. Qing Chaolu asked in a low voice, Master, Sister Pei and the old master, do you want to fight with arms or literary fights or stand on your feet and join hands? Sui right side couldn't help but smile and said, let's read less unreliable miscellaneous books. This type of mountain-level questioning boxing is no better than the mountain-level martial arts style. In the center of the martial arts field, Both sides were about to hand their fists. Pei Qian glanced at Master from the corner of his eye. Qin Pingon nodded and motioned to this big disciple not to press too much, just treat others with sincerity. Then quietly raised a hand, made an 8 gesture and then quickly flipped his palm. Pei Qian understood. 8 realms, 10 punches. On Pei Qian's side, Qin Pingon has only had the experience of teaching boxing and feeding boxing twice, especially the first experience of teaching boxing, regardless of the process or the result. In addition, he was used to throwing his hands at the shopkeeper, so Qin Pingon had not really seen Pei Qian's shots, so it was impossible to say that he was not curious. Qin Pingon only knew that Pei Qian once asked Lu Suiyu in the mountain at Leigong Temple in Iashao, and later in that Jinjiazu, Pei Qian had also been on the battlefield with Chao Xiai and Yu Yufu. As for Yu Yufu's martial arts qualifications, methods and character, Qin Pingon is very clear. It is just that Yu Yuhua was interrupted by someone for the first time in his life when he was able to beat the drums by the gods. There was a smile on Sui's right face and it was really impossible to overlap the image of Pei Qian in his eyes with the image of Xiao Heitan back then. The young woman in front of her has a bun with a ball, a smooth forehead, a nice face and a slender figure, especially her calm and well-deserved master demeanor. It's hard to imagine such a woman when she was a child. She was tired, sly, grudges, hard-minded, most afraid of hardship, most likes to take advantage of small things, unconstrained imagination, messy strange words. After Xue Huai lost his hand, he handed out a palm forward. Pushun Xue Huai, please enlighten me. Pei Qian gave his hand back, his voice was crisp and his expression was indifferent. Leapashen Pei Qian, you are offended. Just these words, this grandmaster's manner, made Qin Pingon mixed with emotions. Want to drink? Qing Kaila's eyes widened and her heart swayed. Sister Pei is the true grandmaster in the legend. She used to be in the Cloud Cave Blessed Land before, and that punch of the king in 8 punches was really unbearable to look back. His mothers are all those who are not right in their minds. They make myself embarrassed. After I have finished learning boxing, I will find a chance to go to Bailong Cave to find him for a while. Well, I still have to learn from the hermit in doing things. To be prudent, to be able to fight and to run after the fight. Then call Bai Xuani who is invincible one-on-one, up. Xue Huai suddenly smiled and asked, can Grandmaster Pei be able to hold down 1.5 levels this time? The old master didn't feel embarrassed when he offered to raise this matter. Jing Qingming and Jing Seiqian on the battlefield of the Dahlia Company, the capital. These 2 nicknames have spread far and wide in other continents. They are famous for their punches and quick fights with the enemy. Especially when Xue Huai saw it with his own eyes, Pei Qian uprooted the boulder in the river, and then moved it to Xindu Mountain above the Sea of Clouds with his own power. The journey is far, thousands of miles away. Xue Huai thinks that she can't do this strong lift. If the opponent is not overwhelmed at all, it is very likely that he will be unable to survive 10 punches. Then the so-called question punch is just one side. It is nothing more than Pei Qian handing his punches. He can only carry a few punches until he falls to the ground. Then simply talk about it. Nothing to learn from each other, the original intention of strengthening martial arts. Xue Huai was actually not afraid of losing punches, only that he was meaningless to lose. What's more, it is a questioning boxing. In fact, Xue Huai knows that it is more of a kind of letting the first game on a chessboard. Although it is not considered that the top national players deliberately feed the low-level players, it is almost the same. Invisibly, Xue Huai is now facing Pei Qian as half a junior in martial arts. Yi Yunyun is very aware of the subtle changes in the heart of this direct disciple, and she will not be disappointed by Xue Huai, a pure martial artist. Pei Qian, who had originally planned to be in the Yuanyu realm, immediately turned his head and looked at Master. This kind of thing still requires Master to make up his mind. If it were not for Huang Yiyun to question the Master next, the person Pei Qian really wanted to ask the boxing would of course be Yi Yunyun, not Xue Huai, who could not get acquainted with Huang Heji. She and this good-looking old Master Xue had nothing to do with each other. If there is a chance to ask Huang Yiyun for a fist, anyway, both sides are full of strength and they can let go of their hands and feet and give their fists with all their strength. Wu Fu asked the fist in the same realm and it was a bit bumpy. What's weird? There is no public revenge. Qin Pingon nodded and signaled that Pei Qian was down. Yi Yunyun and Xue Huai still don't know that Pei Qian has actually reached the end. This is also normal. How long has it been since the two sides had a farewell at the Yunku Fudi last time? Asked the punch to start. In accordance with the conventions of the arena, do not sign the life and death arena competition, only the high and low martial arts competition, the one with the strongest fist gives way to the first. The floor of the sweeping platform trembled slightly. Xue Huai was already close to Pei Qian, and he didn't hold back any effort when he took a shot. The punch he handed was soaring like a picture of a waterfall falling straight down, just turning a scroll of a vertical scroll into a horizontal position. Xue Huaizing relied on his aptitude and extremely high savvy to integrate the 6 immortal pictures passed down by Pu Shan's ancestors, and created a set of boxing techniques. From each immortal picture he took the most subtle part and refined it into a punch as long as one punch was delivered first. The next 5 moves continue. There is no end, the fist is closely connected and there is a tendency for rivers to flow to the sea. Pei Qian didn't retreat but instead moved forward. He actually raised his elbow and directly resisted Xue Huai's punch. Compared with the old man from Zhulu, he was used to the iron cavalry and chisel formation when he was a child, and he punched in front of him. The speed was too slow, the force was too light, and he played cotton. Pei Qian stood there, motionless, just raised one hand, spread his 5 fingers and was about to fall on the old master's front door. When practicing boxing, Xiao Heitan was beaten by the old man countless times, and his whole body jumped on the bamboo floor. After a few more harsh words like to walk on the ground, the old man's fist feeding is not over. Xiao Heitan will be kicked by his toes in the center of his mouth or on his forehead instantly, hitting the corner of the wall, causing pain. My heart, my stomach are turning around. I curl up and I have to get another comment from the old man. I like to be a rag so much. Like your master, I am too poor in martial arts and I am tired and lazy in boxing. I'm very happy. I will be sticky every day. Just next to the little Nuanshu, or with your master trash standing together, staring at small eyes, writing on one's forehead and writing on one's forehead. It will not waste you 2 masters and apprentices. Of course, every time he spoke, the old man would not be idle, and would never give Pei Qian a chance to breathe, or step on a few fingers of the middle and small black carbon, or step on her entire forehead, constantly adding gravity. At this time Xue Huai leaned back slightly, swept across his arm like splitting a wood to make a piano body, sinking vigorously, shaking his fists and howling into the wind. At the same time Xue Huai kicked out fiercely with his toes as sharp as an arrow and as fast as an arrow, poking at Pei Qian's waist and ribs. Pei Qian put an arm on his shoulder, then suddenly raised his leg, twisted his ankle and kicked Xue Huai skillfully, just to stop Xue Huai's fists and feet at the same time. Finally, no longer standing, she moved a few steps horizontally, and in an instant Xue Huai seemed to be waiting for Pei Qian's figure to move. His mind climbed to its apex. A mouthful of pure infuriating energy was nearly twice as fast as the previous circulation speed. It is only said that at this moment Xue Huai's momentum has not lost the 9-level martial artist, and a series of purple fist gangs emerged behind him. Xue Huai, like an 8-armed god, moved forward in one stride. With one punch, countless punches were scattered and countless random punches smashed at Pei Qian at the same time. On the stage of sweeping flowers, Xue Huai's fist was condensed, and his qi was rapidly dissipating in all directions. Cui Dongshan waved his snow-white sleeves and dragged them to the outside of Zhangxin Peak, crushing countless clouds passing through the sea of clouds. Cui Dongshan smiled in his heart and said, "Senior sister can be a man." If it weren't for Pei Qian to stop slightly without showing any traces, Pei Qian could easily carry Xue Huai's hands and feet at first, and then just slapped it down. After hitting the latter's forehead, Xue Huai is probably about to lie down in a big pit and sleep. Cui Dongshan asked cautiously, "Mister, I don't think that the master sister blindly cares about it, right?" Qin Pingon shook his head and smiled. "How is it possible? She didn't ask Yi Shanju about the boxing or asked Master Xue about the boxing, but she still has to talk about etiquette. Actually, Qin Pingon has already seen it, not only because of her master. For the sake of the onlookers, there is a bigger reason for Pei Qian to be restrained. If Pei Qian makes a fist, he will habitually attack him if he wants to achieve perfect fist. To put it simply, Pei Qian is more suitable for unrelenting boxing to determine the outcome, not suitable for this kind of questioning boxing that needs to stop at any time. Therefore, when Pei Qian was in the 8 realms, Lu Suiyu Leigong Temple at the top of Wenquan Mountain, or later on the wall of the capital of the Daduan dynasty, he played 4 games with Chao Xiaiwenquan in succession, which is regarded as Pei Qian's real shot. If the evaluation is harsh, Pushan Xuehuai's realm is still too low. Facing a Pei Qian who is already under pressure, he still can't be the touchstone. Cui Dongshan said cautiously, the big sister may want Xuehuai to punch more. Qin Ping'an angrily smiled and said, okay, I have to thank her when my questioning is over. Yi Yunyun hesitated, but she couldn't help but gather the sound into a line, and curiously asked Qin Ping'an, how do you usually teach boxing? Qin Ping'an can't always say that I, as a master, actually never taught boxing for my master disciple, so I had to use a muddled wording. I'm stupid, teach boxing more diligently can make up for the clumsiness, and when I help to feed the boxing strong, don't feel sorry for the disciple. 6 strokes have passed. Xuehuai still didn't take advantage of it. The 6 strokes have the same meaning, in fact they can only be counted as 1 punch. Of course Xuehuai would not be stupid and take the initiative to speak about it. Pei Qian stood on the white jade railing, stretched out his thumb and gently wiped the blood on the corners of his mouth. Xuehuai's last move was a bit weird. The opponent had already lost all his fists and it could be made out of nothing. Pei Qian almost failed to escape. He could only temporarily deflect his head, but he was still rubbed on his cheek by that fist. Now there is still Sui right side with a golden body and martial artist's physique. She needs to squint her eyes to see clearly the moves of both sides. Not counting Xuehuai's cheating. Because Xuehuai didn't use the means of training qi, it seems that there is an 8 arm to protect the elderly, not to mention the golden body. Tongyi's Hao Pushun boxing method, the principle of pile frame is from the fairy figure, it is really good, not a fancy. As for the 2 sword fairy embryos of Qing Chaolu and Wuxia, they are actually just watching the excitement. There is a flower in front of him and Xuehuai is no one. In the blink of an eye, he sees the old master Russian dragging out a series of ethereal cyan figures. As if sweeping stage performance in the field, there were many Xuehuai standing at the same time, making the 2 Jianxiu dazzled. Xuehuai calmed down a bit. Although it was clear that Pei Qian intended to take a few points, at least the 2 sides were in the same position to ask the punches, so there would not be too much disparity in strength. It seems that not to mention 10 punches, 20 punches are possible. Xuehuai didn't have any rest, his figure flashed and he approached Pei Qian again, a breath of pure qi in his body and his circulation speed was faster. This time Xuehuai chose to disassemble all the 6 strokes, disrupting the order of his punches. Jianghu handle style, fist is afraid of being young and strong. Masters learn from each other and fist is most afraid of old age. Once the fist at the bottom of the box is gradually familiarized by the opponent, its power will be greatly reduced. After the 7th punch, Xuehuai suddenly used a fist technique other than Pushun, learning from an old senior who met by chance when he was young. It's just that Pei Qian received the fist easily and was not caught off guard. Xuehuai's 8th fist seemed to show weakness, pretending to be weak and want to change a bit of pure qi. Pei Qian did not take the bait and dared to fight in close quarters. The 9th punch, Xuehuai has gathered all his lives learning in a punch and has no name yet. He wants to wait until he reaches the 9 levels. Xuehuai regarded it as the most proud punch in his life. The last time Wu Tan was a guest at Pushun, seeing this boxing, he never liked the first person in Tongyi's Hao martial arts who was courteous. He spoke highly of this and gave a sentence of, exceeding boxing theory is close to method. The punches are like a dragon and the majestic punches are blooming, such as flooding the entire sweeping platform so that there is a small world of air training. Now that Xuehuai has delivered 9 punches, Pei Qian no longer worked so hard to suppress his own fist. The young woman Wu Fu instantly opened her fist frame, running through clouds and flowing water. Her fist did not continue to flow freely to the world outside her body, but suddenly seemed to converge into a mustard seed. At the same time, the sweeping platform seemed to cover the sky and the sun. Fist, for example, the water descent of the land-based flood dragon, seeing the true dragon in the sky, actually retreats on its own, coming like a flood and going like a low tide. On the other hand, Pei Qian's mustard fist is like a bright moon on the sea. This punch, like a divine edict, evokes a day of bright moon. Pei Qian stepped on the ground and the entire mountain sweeping platform was nothing different, but below the Banxian peak outside the sweeping platform, the forest birds fluttered their wings and scattered, and the mountains were dusty everywhere. 1 punch, 1 straight line. Xuehuai Ru fell into the ice cave with a strong breath, so that he could not close his eyes, retreat, or avoid it. Anyway, he was destined to avoid it. Yi Yunyun squinted her eyes and asked Qin Pingan, "This fist is the secret of the Luopa mountain that is not passed on?" Qin Pingan had sleeves with both hands, lazily leaning back against the railing, shook his head and smiled. "No, no one has taught it. It is a fist technique created by Pei Qian." A punch stopped 1 foot away from Xue Huai's door. Pei Qian suddenly took his fist, backed 3 steps and stopped talking, but still didn't say much. Pei Qian just clasped his fist and said, "Acknowledge." Xue Huai waited until his eyesight returned to clarity, and he felt lingering, sweating profusely for an instant, as if walking through a ghost gate, taking a deep breath, withdrawing 5 steps backwards, holding his fists in return, and said in a deep voice, "Teached." Cui Dongshan hurriedly asked in his heart, "Master sister, when did you secretly make your own punches again without saying hello? It scared the little brother a lot." Pei Qian said, "Not long ago. I used to take the wind kite ferry to Tongyi's house with master before." One night with the independent bow, Pei Qian looked at the bright moon on the sea. It seemed to be within reach, but in fact it was far away. Brand new punch. Yi Yunyun straightened her waist slightly, and then it was her turn to question Qin Pingan. When Xue Huai came to her side, Yi Yunyun asked, "Wait for you to break through to the 9 levels in the coming year. Will you dare to ask Pei Qian for the second punch?" Xue Huai smiled heartily. "Why don't you dare? Master's question is really unreasonable." Yi Yunyun nodded in approval and said, "Very good. You can lose punches but you can't lose. Pushan Wufu should have this state of mind." Pei Qian came to master's side with a shy expression, scratching his head habitually. Qin Pingan smiled and said, "Especially the last punch, the weather is pretty good." Qing Chaolu and Yu Xiehui became more and more vigorous, and finally it was Master Hermit's turn to punch. Qin Pingan suddenly turned to look at Huang Yiyun and asked with a smile, "Master Yi Shan, do you mind if I use a handy weapon?" Yi Yunyun smiled and shook her head, "It's okay. Wufu never pays attention to unarmed fists. Just like Wu Tan Wu Xing, he will be used to using sabers and wooden spears against the enemy. If none of them is useful, it means that it is a disparity in teaching and the opponent is not even worth it." Wu Tan pressed on one side. Qin Pingan smiled at Pei Qian and stretched out his hand and said, "Master has to borrow something from you, that is, the trophy you had on the battlefield of Jinjiazhou. Senior Fu Lu Yuxian gave you." Although Pei Qian was astonished in her heart, her face was as usual, because she had never seen Master show any spear skills. Pei Qian still took out a long spear that had been interrupted by her at both ends of the small cave sky, presented by Mr. Xiao Mo. However, in recent years she occasionally took out this long spear and secretly practiced the spear technique that was born out of that crazy magic sword technique. In fact, it was just idle and jokes. Qin Pingan stretched out his hand to grasp the middle of the spear, and slowly walked towards the center of the flower-sweeping platform. During this time he weighed the weight of the spear, then twisted his wrist several times, abruptly arced, and the spear circled. "Don't take advantage of it again." Also took advantage of it. A spear like an arm. Qin Pingan glanced at the big disciple of Kaishan, holding back a smile as if saying that he would be optimistic later, and he could learn the essence of how many marksmanship is. Because of the Zhou chief, Qin Pingan is actually no stranger to Wu Pan, who was able to obtain the title of martial saint in Tongyi's Hao. Moreover, martial arts in the world with vast rivers and streams are, in the final analysis, the only way for thousands to return to the sect. Practicing boxing is still sword training, but boxing is not spear skill. How smart is Pei Qian? He immediately turned his head and stared angrily. "Big white goose, did you tell the master that I have spear stealing?" Cui Dongshan's face was dull, dumbfounded. This can also be suspected. Is the friendship of the two going to be destroyed like this? Cui Dongshan quickly stretched out 2 fingers, his eyes complained, "I can swear to God there will be no such thing. Sister, it's really wrong. I'm dead. I'm sorry, Brother Xiao is not the kind of person who likes to chew his tongue behind his back." Pei Qian leaned against the railing, too lazy to talk nonsense with the big white goose, and began to concentrate, thinking that he must carefully observe Master's questioning. Before in Jingyang Mountain he had to fight with the old ape who moved the mountain. Master was actually useless. Full force. He wore a long gown and stood still in the field. It is not a long spear in the orthodox sense, so there is no tassel and no codification. Yi Yunyun, dressed in yellow, followed and stood facing him. Both of them are stunned fighters and they happen to be alive for the time being. According to etiquette, each registration number. Pushun Yunkatang Yi Yunyun. Luo Poshan's Hula, Qin Pingon. Pei Qin grinned. Huang Yiyun is going to suffer. If I remember correctly, it is the first time that Master added Bamboo Tower when introducing himself. Outsiders certainly don't know the mystery, only the pure martial artist of his own Luopa Mountain will know its weight. For an instant, the two Shijuwufu, both extremely young on their respective continents, moved their bodies almost at the same time. Qin Pingon held the end of the long spear, and the spear was pierced into a thread, deified infinitely, and in a flash, a splendid spear shot appeared. The yellow clothes seemed to be more vigorous than the blue shirt, already avoiding the torrential rain. The blue shirt moved sideways, set up the spear and knocked it down. The tempered spear was so strong that the gun body was still the same. Straight, only near the tip of the gun bent out a weird arc, just hitting Huang Yun's shoulder. Yi Yunyun bent over, twisted her waist and turned her body as fast as thunder. She slapped her hand on the spear and at the same time leaned forward slightly. She came to King Shen's body and hit her knees. Qin Pingon just took the 6 steps of Shaking Mountain's fist, moved his figure, only slightly changed the course. The two sides seemed to have exchanged positions in a tacit understanding. Qin Pingon turned around with a shot still straight out and Yi Yunyun turned out to be. Just stand there on the tip of the gun, the dragon flies, stepping on the gun body and leaning away from the head in a green shirt. Qin Pingon leaned back, dragged the spear with one hand and withdrew several feet. Suddenly turned around, the spear followed everyone and a long spear in his hand was cut at Huang Yun's waist. Yi Yunyun's hovering figure disappeared out of thin air, and the majestic chi of the spear fell into the air, slamming into the sky through the gun body, directly splitting the sea of clouds high above. There was still an astonishing sound of muffled thunder shaking. Hit the head with a shot. Yi Yunyun turned sideways, the gun body almost landed straight in front of her eyes, but was still more than an inch away from the flower sweeping table. The gun body suddenly stagnated and hung in the air, but the ground was swept by abundant air, and a gully was still cracked on the spot. The two sides are running fast and fast. Not only Sui right side is exhausted, but he still can't capture any pictures. Even Xue Huai can only look at the general idea. Xue Huai admits that if he takes any punches from both sides, it seems like an understatement, but in fact the questioning can be over. His far-reaching physique, under this weight of spear skills and boxing moves, is completely vulnerable. Yi Yunyun's graceful posture, handing fists with Qingshan, can be described as fascinating, like a picture of an expert walking chanting. The fist is like a dragon and the dragon is like a water. He seemed to have the upper hand. The punch was supposed to hit the opponent's chin. Qingshan just moved one step horizontally, and the spear on his shoulder seemed to pick a mountain. Qingshan's shoulders were slightly tilted and the gun body rolled a little. Yi Yunyun instantly withdrew to several feet, avoiding a punch. Qin Pingon put his fingers together, almost touching Yi Yunyun's eyebrows. He turned to holding a long spear again, drawing arcs again and again as if to deliberately play a distance advantage. On the flower sweeping table, the luminosity drawn by the tip of the gun is dazzling. The circles and circles may overlap or interlace, which is dazzling. Yi Yunyun is still calm and relaxed. More than 60 piles and boxing moves derived from the 6 pictures of Pushun immortals have been skillfully used in her hands. Compared with her disciple Xue Huai, she used all her strength to master and apprentice. There is a difference between the two sides. And the number of shots in that blue shirt was roughly 3 and 7, but every time Qin Shan's his offensive, especially the several bursts of spear, made Xue Huai mistakenly believe that Wu Pan shot the gun here. Because Wu Tan's only successor, Guo Bailu, this astonishingly talented young martial artist, had a questioning fist with Xue Huai in private. Although Xue Huai was one level higher than the other side, it was still only a small victory. Moreover, Xue Huai knew well that the other party was concealed and he had not fully used his assassin. Of course, Xue Huai had never pressed the realm and he had not put all his punches. Through the discussion with Guo Bailu, Xue Huai could roughly see the subtlety and uniqueness of a part of Wu Tan's marksmanship. Today, when I look at Qin Shan's marksmanship, I always feel that Wu Tan's moves are completely different from each other, but they are similar in spirit. In the rivers and lakes of the mountain, There has always been a saying that the moon sword has been practicing guns for a long time. If you put aside the suspicion of the famous spearmanship experts, no wonder Qin Shanzhu used the word hands in hand when he spoke to the master before. A shot slammed Huang Yun's neck swiftly. The tip of the gun fell through. After that, the tip of the gun pointed directly at the door several times, but failed every time. Huang Yun's face was indifferent from beginning to end, calm and relaxed, and finally reached out and grabbed the tip of the gun, dragged one to his side and kicked it out again. A simple drag and kick, but two unspoken secrets verbally taught by the past dynasties of Pushun mountain masters are used. One punch is called Daozu Qianjiu, and the other is called Water God Backing Mountain. The kick made Qin Pingan fly upside down like a bell, but the tip of the spear also cut into Yi Yunyun's palm with a blood trough with deep bones. Like a shadow, Yi Yunyun swept across and kicked to Qin Pingan's temple. Qin Pingan could only put a palm into his ears in a hurry, and then with a bang, the blue shirt flew out dozens of feet away. Qin Pingan used the tip of his spear against the railing of the flower sweeping table and stepped on it. The ground is just enough to stop the figure. Yi Yunyun quickly changed her martial arts spirit. She was instantly full of energy, full of fists, and even a few centuries ahead. If a drunkard drinks a pot of mellow wine, he is still not happy. Xue Huai, who was watching the battle, looked at the master Qin Shanzhu, who could not fall to the ground after being kicked. The old master suddenly thought of stealing a punch? Xue Huai handed out the same Pushun boxing technique, or even the same boxing method, which would only be far from Master Huang Yun. Master once said that the 10 levels of martial arts are full of mystery, and any mountain master who has reached the limit seems to be able to learn boxing by seeing boxing. It's just that Xue Huai thinks again, far from it. It must be that he wants something wrong. This Lord Qin Shan is a gentleman. Although he didn't deal much with this young hidden official, Xue Huai still had this vision and knowledge. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to teach Pei Qian, a pioneering disciple who excelled in his boxing and treated others with courtesy. In addition, the world boxing method at a high level cannot be used casually. The contradiction of boxing theory and the hedging of boxing methods are all taboos of martial arts. Those exquisite fist moves in the world that came from the hands of other families are not gold and silver, and they can be spent when they are put in their own pockets. Some fist moves are like iron cavalry rushing and killing, while others are formed by pawns. In addition, the rigidity and flexibility of the fist, the speed, the weight, the fierce and domineering of the fist, the calmness and so on, make it extremely difficult for a martial arts master to reconcile. Not only greed can't chew more, even affects the flow rate of a mouthful of pure true energy. Just like Wu Pan, the martial sage of his own Tongyi's Hao, the so-called master of 100 families, successfully cast the world spear technique. How can it really be as rumored that the world is only my family, and there is no spearmanship in the world? Without a husband by his side, Cui Dongshan wouldn't say anything about taking the sect master's heirs. He had already sat down on the railing, leaned back and glanced at Xue Huai, who was focused and watching the battle, secretly complained, "Sister, if I were Xue master at this moment, I must doubt whether my husband has secretly learned Pushun boxing." Pei Qian didn't have a good temper. "This is human nature, you should not fan the flames on my side." The big white goose slapped the slap again on the railing. The master sister has cultivated her heart, and her mind is like a sea and a mountain. It will make the little brother feel ashamed. Pei Qian laughed. "It's almost enough." Next, Yi Yunyun, after changing a bit of pure innocence, passed on Na Pushan's boxing techniques and some of his own boxing moves. On this sweeping stage he put out his punches heartily and heartily. Sui, who was also a woman, was a bit dizzy on the right. This Tongyi's Hao Huang Yiyun was indeed a great beauty with temperament and appearance. During the period, Qin Pingan's most dominant move was to round with a shot and hit Huang Yiyun in the abdomen. The latter almost slipped off the ground, but Huang Yiyun knocked on the ground with his elbow and quickly stood up. He quickly returned the color and hit the body of the gun with a punch, and the body of the gun burst out of an arc for a month and a half before hitting Qin Pingan's chest. This questioning punch, on the whole, was still a result of failing to really tell the outcome. Yi Yunyun or boxing is like pounding or like a waterfall. Handing a fist with one hand, if the immortal chuckles the piano, secretly twisting his fingers, the fist is as fast as a flying sword. Her figure moved, the gong was overflowing and the mist filled with water, and Yi Yunyun was like a mountain and river of Shundi who showed off her qi training. In the end, Qin Pingon used a punch in exchange for Yi Yunyun's punch and kick. After that, the two sides stood still and exchanged a mouthful of pure innocence. It's just that Xue Huai is in the mood right now, but he is not at all relaxed. Because it was obviously the master who gave one more foot, but the distance between the two sides' retreat was roughly the same. This means that Qin Shan's physique of the end martial artist is actually higher than that of his master. Pei Qian was a little guilty, but it was difficult for her to say anything during the master's questioning. When I was a child, I watched Lao Wei play chess with Xiao Bai, and the hammer watched chess without talking, a real gentleman. Wu Fu asked fist, others said. It is a taboo. Qin Pingon gently tossed the spear in his hand to Pei Qian. For example, go starts first. Practicing hands stop here. Qin Pingon seemed to see through Yi Yunyun's mind and smiled. Chao Ci is not as weak as Yi Shanju imagined. Yi Yunyun smiled and said, I know you didn't try your best. After a pause, Yi Yunyun didn't just give her a fist when she just reported her name. This time she stepped back and stood with Pushun standing first. Isn't it the same for me? Seeing this scene, Xue Huai looked solemn. If you continue to fight, no matter who wins or loses, one side will really be seriously injured. Qin Pingon laughed off. Roll up one sleeve gently. Then gently wipe the arm with the palm of the hand as if wiping something. On the left arm, some kind of talisman in layers was erased by Qin Pingon. The same is true when you change your hands and roll up your sleeves. Finally, with a twist of his toes, Qin Ping's legs and knees went down from the ankles, each of which had 3 Jin Qi talismans, all shattered. Pei Qian looked shocked. She really didn't know about this. She hit the big white goose next to her with an elbow, and the big white goose raised her sleeves and fell into a tan, and then still broke the power in an instant, began to grin, vaguely said, Master sister, the conscience of heaven and earth, the sun and the moon can be learned. If I know the truth deliberately not to tell, you will no longer be your little brother in the future, you just call my brother. As someone who asked Qin Pingon face to face, Yi Yunyun could most intuitively feel the suffocating pressure. In the end, there was only one thought in her mind. Non-human. Although Yi Yunyun has never formally asked Wu Tan about the boxing, but in a few meetings that Tongyi's Hao martial sage will bring a huge pressure to Yi Yunyun, and Wu Tan will give everyone a natural vigor and vitality. The sense of strong muscles and bones, it would even make the Wufu around him involuntarily produce an illusion of being a dwarf. The feeling of facing Wu Tan before has made Yi Yunyun feel extremely bad, like a weak girl going out walking alone at night and meeting a powerful man in the alley no matter what. Whether the other party is malicious will make women uneasy. But at this moment Yi Yunyun turned out to have something that was contrary to her own temperament, and she was ashamed of her martial arts and the surname Yun Chao Tang. Great despair. It's like there is a voice that echoes in my heart constantly. No need to ask punches. Don't ask punches. We'll lose, we'll die. And this kind of suffocation and despair that a pure martial artist absolutely can't have, made Yi Yunyun, the master of the realm, almost furious. No wonder Jiang Shangzhen would persuade himself not to challenge this person. With such a mindset, how can one fight one continent? How can we help Yunkatang rank among the Haoran sects? Qin Pingon keenly noticed the changes in Yi Yunyun's mood, and suddenly shouted in his heart, Yi Yunyun. Yi Yunyun's originally loose eyes and mind were like hearing a burst of spring thunder, but she couldn't help but gather for a few minutes. Then she subconsciously converged her mind in an instant. In an instant, Yi Yunyun's mind was bright, as if the big world outside her body and the small world outside her body were nothing. Qin Pingon slowed down and punched but stood still. After a while, Yi Yunyun withdrew from all her minds from the mysterious realm. After nothing was left, the mountains and rivers spread out like a scroll one by one. People with deep memories are like colored scrolls, pictures of life with relatively vague memories are like white-drawn scrolls with fine brushwork, and things that you think you have forgotten but actually seem to be sealed up are like freehand ink paintings. In the painting there is no flesh and blood, but the meaning is. At that moment Yi Yunyun only felt like a god standing in the air, high in the sky, overlooking the earth, mountains and rivers. This is the return of the second level of ending. Qin Pingon continued to say in his heart, don't be anxious to ask for a fist, you can wait a while. Yi Yunyun's eyes were very bright. She saw that she put away the ancient Pushun boxing frame, stepped back, arched her hand again, and the one in front of her gave her the same feeling. The inhuman green shirt guest silently thanked, but Yi Yunyun no longer had the slightest despair in her heart at this moment. She was silent for a moment, smiling like a flower, and said, "You have to be careful." Qin Pingon asked, "Are you sure?" The original intention was to ask this Lord Yishan, surely he doesn't need to stabilize his return to the true realm? After all, you can only be regarded as a small one at the moment. But Yi Yunyun has already opened her boxing frame, and there are even signs that. So Qin Pingon disappeared in place. Since this Huang Yiyun wanted to use his Qin Pingon realm to roughly infer the level and depth of Chaosis martial arts. No problem. Qin Pingon still chose to keep 20% of his strength, exactly the same as when he was in Gongdalan and Chaoxiai Wenquan. At that time Chaoxiai also gained 20% of his strength. Huang Yiyun lost all her senses in an instant just like that. There is no longer a green shirt in the world. After her head tilted, Qin Ping slapped her head on the side and pushed it hard. Yi Yunyun's body seemed to be suddenly placed in the air. He wore a green shirt and moved horizontally, raising his arm high and making a fist straight down. Huang Yiyun was hit in the waist with a punch and she crashed to the ground. Cui Dongshan gasped, turning his head to ignore the scene. Fortunately, Qin Pingon stretched out the back of his feet extremely quickly, slightly slowed down the opponent's falling speed, and then immediately backed up a few steps. At the flower sweeping platform, apart from Cui Dongshan and disciple Pei Qian, no one should be able to see this action. Yi Yunyun is still heavily lying on the ground and the whole person seems a bit dumbfounded. Qin Pingon spread out his sleeves again, clasped his fists and said, "Accept." Yi Yunyun staggered and stood up, forced to suppress the shaking of the mountains and rivers in the small world of the human body. She also needs to try her best to stabilize the disordered aura that has been afflicted by the pond fish. She has a complex expression, clasped her fists and replied with a polite smile and said with a wry smile, "Accept." The same is said of acquisition. How can it mean the same? For a time the whole sweeping table, as the questioning parties were silent, the rest of the people became silent. Yi Yunyun forcibly swallowed a mouthful of blood, her pale face improved a little bit, and then she asked in her heart, "Is it right that as long as you and Chao Xiai are at the same level, you won't be able to fight at all?" Qin Pingon said, "It's okay to learn from me, but if you ask Chao Xiai about the boxing, you definitely won't have to fight." Yi Yunyun fell silent again. Qin Pingon was a little embarrassed. It doesn't seem appropriate to say anything polite at this moment. Cui Dongshan looked a little worried. This Master Yishan originally planned to become his own honorable guest of Xindu Mountain, but don't lose it because of his husband's fist. Yi Yunyun finally asked, "I heard that the Lu family of Ai Aizhou did not lose. Is Chao Xiai really that invincible?" As for Gong Delin's famous blue-white controversy, Yi Yunyun also knew the general process through Shanshui Dibao. Qin Pingon said, "Chao Xiai is of course invincible, but it's not completely out of chance." Yi Yunyun clasped her fists and smiled, "Farewell." Qin Pingon was stunned. Cui Dongshan's eyes are even more pitiful. "Look, sir, you have done a good job. Yishanju is not ready to participate in the sect celebration." Yi Yunyun couldn't laugh or cry and said helplessly, "Recover." Yi Yunyun just took Shui Huai to Mishua Peak, steadily walking all the way without keeping away from the wind. Only after walking far away when she left the sweeping platform and the Zhangxian Peak, between a mountain road with cliffs on both sides, Huang Yiyun stopped and stood on the bluestone steps, supporting the cliff with one hand. Reach out another hand to support the waist just a little bit after rubbing it. It hurts so much that a woman's brow frown. The disciple Shui Huai didn't dare to breathe for a while without squinting, pretending that he didn't see anything. The old master quickly walked forward understandingly and silently walked ahead. Shui Huai slowed down and had already walked out more than a dozen steps before standing in place with his back facing the master. Yi Yunyun stepped up. "Izhou Wuxia boxing out of Pushun, don't take it seriously. I can't control what outsiders say, but in the future Yunkatang disciple who dares to say this to me in person." Just speaking softly, it involved the wound on her waist. Yi Yunyun oozes sweat from her forehead, and she doesn't say one more word. Shui Huai felt that it was not good for him to pretend to be bored all the way, so he bit his head and said, "This Qin Jiangxian's senior brothers Wade Jiangxian, he also repaired the sword of the Middle-earth god continent in the early years, and gave the most praise to the sword fairy." The fetus argument seems to become a curse. Yi Yunyun smiled and said, "It's better not to say it." Shui Huai had to drive on silently. On the other side of the flower sweeping platform, Pei Qian was full of vigor, even more triumphant than winning a punch. Qin Pingan smiled and didn't say anything. It seemed that Huang Yiyun was a punch on the mountain, but in fact the distance to someone's punch was still only halfway up the mountain. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.